Ever since he was a kid, Callum Wells had seen things no one else could. Shadows that moved wrong, beasts with glowing eyes, and mages who blended in among humans like whispers in the dark. Monsters, magical creatures, and spellcasters hiding in plain sight. He'd grown up knowing the world was way bigger, way darker than anyone around him realized. Then one day, everything changed. Callum discovered that he wasn't just a witness to that hidden world. He was part of it. But that moment of wonder didn't last long. The Guild of Magical Regulation had eyes everywhere. Every mage on Earth lived under their watch. Strict rules, tighter leashes. No exceptions. Callum wasn't about to let anyone pull his strings. If the Guild wanted to puppet it, they'd have to look somewhere else. By the time anyone realized it, he'd already been branded one of the most dangerous criminals in the world. But that's jumping ahead. Let's rewind to where it all began. A month earlier, Callum had no clue where he was or what the hell was going on. An agent from the Guild, Taryn, had taken him in for questioning. The accusation? Being involved in an attack on a fitness center in Shanghai. That's when they told him magic was real and he was a mage, whether he liked it or not. During interrogation, Callum explained that earlier that morning, he'd attended his mother's funeral. There, he'd met a man radiating an eerie, otherworldly aura. The kind of aura he'd seen before. People like that were invisible to everyone else, but not to him. After that encounter, his head felt like it was splitting in two. One of those people was Mr. Shanghai, the gym owner who often helped Callum out. To Callum's eyes, the man looked like a demon dragon wrapped in human skin. That day, Shanghai had asked Callum to help a new member, Maria, get settled in. He approached her. They chatted, and she seemed friendly enough, until she suddenly collapsed. Callum rushed to her side, heart pounding, and that's when chaos hit. Armed men stormed into the gym, gunfire echoing off the walls. To protect everyone, Shanghai unleashed his true form, his inner demon flaring out in a storm of fire. Callum could barely stay conscious. His vision burning red as flames devoured the gym. Smoke filled the air. His lungs screamed for air, and his strength drained fast. Minutes later, he came to, and saw Maria lying nearby. He swore he'd save her no matter what. Lifting her onto his back, he pushed forward through the inferno, dodging sparks and broken wires. One live wire struck him with a surge of electricity, but he didn't stop. Just as his knees were about to give out, a violet glow flared beneath his feet. A portal ripped open and hurled them both out into the street. Callum just stood there, stunned, no idea how he'd done that. But before he could even catch his breath, an agent from the guild spotted him. The man quickly extinguished the flames with a burst of magic. Then he demanded an explanation. The agent claimed traces of dragon fire had been detected at the scene and pressed Callum for details about his powers. Callum could only shrug helplessly. He didn't even know what they were talking about. That's when they clamped a magic-suppressing bracelet around his wrist. Instantly, the splitting headache vanished. Before he knew it, he was being dragged off to the guild's headquarters. The higher-ups there were shocked. Despite the suppressor, Callum was still fully conscious. Worse, he'd apparently used some unknown form of magic to save the girl from the fire. The guild couldn't figure out how a 30-year-old mage had gone completely unregistered, especially since his family was totally ordinary. Agent Sen eventually admitted the Shanghai gym incident wasn't Callum's fault, but registration was non-negotiable. Normally, mages were identified as kids, trained, and assigned roles within the guild. But Callum? He was an anomaly. When he tried to refuse, saying he worked as an architect and didn't need their help, things turned cold. The agent made it clear. Deserters and unregistered mages were considered threats. They were hunted down and erased before they could endanger anyone. That's when Callum realized he had no choice. The guild had him cornered. He was forced into mandatory training before they'd decide his fate. The guild demanded absolute obedience, threatening death for defiance. But Callum Wells wasn't born to bow. He'd find his own path, even if it meant burning theirs to ash. Agent Sen announced the first trial. A strange crystal device was brought forth. Its purpose, to flood Callum's veins with raw mana and reveal his true magical nature. At first he felt nothing, just silence and cold metal against his skin. Then the pain hit, like molten glass tearing through his body. He screamed, the sound echoing through the sterile room, before collapsing to the floor as the world went dark. Minutes later, consciousness clawed its way back to him. The medics whispered that his age had cursed him. Tests like this were never meant for adults. While he'd been out cold, the guild had burned a magical sigil into his skin. Callum understood then. His freedom meant nothing to them. He was property now. They told him he was a spatial mage, a rarity among mages, which meant they wouldn't let him walk free, not without a leash. He could feel the manipulation in every word, but he still agreed to take on a mentor. They assigned Agent Sen, the same man who'd tested him, as his handler until his official placement. On the way to their next stop, Callum asked where he was being sent. Judging by his powers, the guild might dump him into the transportation division. Sen mentioned that he was both a pyromancer and aeromancer, one of those who fought on the front lines. The guild, he said, hunted down rogue mages and protected the mana worlds that supplied Earth with its energy. Those were realms crawling with vampires, werewolves, and creatures that haunted legends. Callum wanted to call it all nonsense, but deep down, he knew the world he'd known was gone forever. They arrived at a guild guest house, where Callum was given a small room, plain, cold, temporary. Sen handed him a laptop filled with files on magic, warning him that tomorrow he'd be taken back to headquarters. Reading through the data, Callum learned the basics. Magic split into two forces, mana and vis. Mana was the world's breath, the invisible ocean of energy mages drew power from. Vis, however, came from within, the unique, personal current that shaped a mage's abilities. His, apparently, bent space itself. The material barely scratched the surface, but Callum devoured it anyway. Kids started learning this stuff in magical preschools. He was decades behind. He had to catch up, so he began with something simple. He fixed his gaze on a pen lying on the desk, reached out his hand, and focused. A hum built inside him, his vis awakening. The pen lifted from the desk, trembling in midair. But one flicker of distraction, and it shot upward, embedding itself in the ceiling. Despite the mishap, a grin tugged at his lips. Magic worked. Now he just had to learn control. Maybe being under the guild's thumb wasn't total doom. It was a chance to practice, to grow stronger. Yet the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The guild wasn't just a magical academy. It was a global web of power, pulling strings in the shadows. No organization that powerful stayed clean for long, and Callum refused to be someone's pawn in their cosmic chess game. The deeper he read, the darker it got. The guild's assignments for mages weren't simple jobs. They were death sentences. Combat divisions, interdimensional missions through the 6 portals. Fatalities over 50%. Most of the dead were those without backing, mages who didn't belong to the great houses or the guild elite. Archmages lived for centuries, ruling from behind the scenes, bending others' wills like puppeteers of fate. In their world, Callum's life would be worth less than dust. Closing the laptop, he made a silent vow to stop caring about the system that wanted to cage him. He'd rather die free than live as a slave. As Sen slept soundly in the next room, Callum made his move. He cracked open the guild's safes and pocketed every credit chip he could find. If he was going to vanish, he needed resources. Packing his bag, he crept toward the window. But as he leaned out, the floorboards betrayed him with a sharp creak. Sen's eyes snapped open. He was on his feet in seconds, bursting into the next room. Realizing his student had escaped, fury ignited in him. Green light flared around his body, the air itself warping under the surge of mana. Now it was a hunt, and Sen wanted to see just how far Callum thought he could run. Panic clawed at Callum's chest. He had to move, fast. He thought he'd shaken the agent, until Sen's earlier words echoed in his mind: pyromancer and aeromancer. That meant he could manipulate air, fire, and movement itself. The wind around Sen twisted into a vortex, lifting him skyward like a crimson storm. And in that moment, Callum understood. He never really had a chance to escape. Agent Sen saw Callum's escape for what it was, a reckless, rookie move. The kid had guts, sure, but guts alone wouldn't save him from what came next. He'd need one hell of an explanation, or things would turn ugly fast. Without it, he'd earn the guild's eternal wrath. And when that happened, they wouldn't send just Sen. They'd send someone far worse. Sen didn't waste a single second. His eyes scanned the crowd below, tracking the faint shimmer of spatial residue. There, his target. The moment he locked on, he dove from above, blasting a compressed wave of air toward the street. It ripped through the air, slicing just above Callum's head, close enough to ruffle his hair. Callum spotted him and sprinted harder, adrenaline roaring in his veins. He hadn't expected Sen to catch up this fast, but of course he should have known. You couldn't hide from a man who bent wind and flame to his will. The air howled around them, whipping through the streets. Onlookers glanced up, murmuring about an incoming storm. Callum realized how deadly Sen's stealth was. The man moved like a ghost, invisible to everyone except him. That was his magic's nature. Callum needed another plan, fast. He darted past a clothing shop, caught sight of a rack of jackets, and knew what he had to do. Disguise, blend in, vanish. Meanwhile, Sen prowled through the streets, scanning every shadow, every movement. He spotted a man wearing similar clothes, but when their eyes met, Sen knew instantly it wasn't Callum. Then he saw it, a familiar duffel bag lying near a bench. He opened it, expecting gear or money. It was empty. The realization stung. The kid had played him, clean getaway. By that time, Callum was already sliding into a taxi, voice steady as he gave directions to Wesley Farm, far from the main highways. No flight paths, no security grids. If he could reach the outskirts, he could rent a crop duster and disappear into some quiet town. The disguise helped, but he knew it wouldn't last long. Once alone, he took drastic measures. Scissors in hand, he chopped away his hair, dyeing it pitch black until the mirror reflected a stranger's face. Then he headed to a black market magic pawn shop, a place that sold new lives for the right price. The shopkeeper demanded $2,000. Callum paid in cash and tossed in his guild-issued laptop to seal the deal. Minutes later, he walked out with fresh documents under a new name, Chase Hall. It wasn't perfect, but it was freedom. The guild wouldn't track Chase Hall, not easily. Back at guild headquarters, chaos erupted. Callum Wells had vanished into thin air, and no one could explain how. The agents had only placed sealing spells on the doors, assuming no one would be crazy enough to jump out a third-story window. They scoured the room, but no magical residue remained, proof that he'd simply slipped away. Archmage Duval was furious. A spatial mage with unregistered potential loose in the world? Unacceptable. Agent Jean tried to defend himself, explaining that he'd even sought help from vampires and werewolves, but negotiations had failed. He added that spatial magic was notoriously unstable, and maybe the boy just wanted a normal life. Duval dismissed the idea entirely. No mage walked away from power, not willingly. To her, Callum was already a criminal. Her aura flared like a storm. With a flick of her hand, she slammed Jean to the floor using raw mana, her voice cold and absolute as she ordered the search to continue. Under her breath, she admitted she hoped they found him soon, because if they didn't, she'd handle it herself. And if Callum Wells truly intended to live as a rogue mage, her duty was clear: capture and execute him without hesitation. Meanwhile, far to the west, a small, quiet town slept under golden sunlight. There, a man calling himself Chase Hall arrived with a simple goal: to buy a home and start over. Sheriff Arthur Langley and his wife Jessica greeted him warmly at the door. As Chase inspected the property, he noted its silence, its isolation. Perfect for disappearing. A peaceful place to rest, rebuild, and maybe pretend the world wasn't chasing him. Jessica asked, half joking, if he wasn't a bit young to be retiring already. He replied calmly that he just needed time to heal, to breathe again. The deal closed fast. The Langleys had been trying to sell for months. The next day, Callum, now Chase, moved in. The money he'd taken would last 2 years if he lived quietly. But peace always felt temporary. He knew it was only a matter of time before the guild found his trace. Unless he learned to truly master his magic. Spatial magic was shrouded in mystery. Most books barely scratched the surface, just portals and basic theory. Without a teacher like Duval, progress would be slow, maybe impossible. Still, he tried. The first time he attempted to open a portal, it was pure instinct guiding him. On the second attempt, he steadied his breath, stretched out his hand, and focused. Space folded before him. A small rift shimmered open, only a few feet wide, but it was real. A victory born of will alone. Fired up with determination, Callum dove deep into exploring new ways to bend his magic to his will. His mind buzzed with ideas, like a restless storm ready to burst into creation. By Monday, He ran into a small but annoying problem. He was out of shampoo. Instead of running to the store, he opened a tiny portal straight into his bathroom cabinet and pulled out a fresh bottle. It worked like a charm. By Wednesday, he had already mastered forming a vis sphere, a beginner-level magic construct that even kids at magic academies could handle. It wasn't meant for offense, but it looked stunning. A glowing orb of raw mana swirling with energy, like a piece of the night sky trapped in his hands. By Friday, Callum went beyond what the book said was possible. Though manuals claimed telekinesis was reserved for battle mages, he figured out a way to manipulate gravity itself. He jokingly called it his broke man's telekinesis. It was a messy hack of spatial magic, but he squeezed every drop of potential from it. On Sunday, he stepped out into his backyard for some real training. Closing his eyes, he drew in the mana around him, feeling it swirl like invisible wind currents. After a while, something clicked. He realized he could see without opening his eyes, his awareness stretching through walls and objects. The technique was hard to control and had limited range, but it was a massive leap forward. Suddenly, his vision caught Jessica through solid walls, clear as day. When he approached, she mentioned that school was about to start, and some kids might cut through his yard on their way. Callum told her it was fine, though his backyard still looked like a war zone after his training sessions. Jessica smiled, saying the kids wouldn't mind helping clean it up. They loved spending time outside anyway. She invited him over sometime, and he promised he would. But as soon as she left, panic crept in. He feared she might have seen traces of his training. Vis residue was everywhere, and leftover mana clung to every corner. If anyone detected those traces, his cover would be blown in no time. He realized he needed to learn how to erase his magical footprint, fast, or his disguise wouldn't last. Meanwhile, back in the guild's lab, results from his earlier test had finally come in. The data showed no prior magic use, but there were anomalies. Big ones. At first, the researchers brushed it off until they recalibrated their instruments and discovered that Callum had dispersed 100 thoms of mana, an absurd amount for an untrained mage. Stranger still, his tracking bracelet only registered 3 thoms left inside, meaning he had somehow absorbed 97 thoms of energy before the device even kicked in. For a novice, that should have been impossible. The raw power alone could have ripped his body apart. If he'd really never cast before, his vis reserves should have been full. The scientists were baffled. No spells, no chants, no signs of casting. Yet his mana levels were nearly drained. 30 years without touching magic, and now he'd become a living mystery no one could explain. Callum kept pushing forward, now focusing on mastering vis control, the core energy that defined every mage. He placed a metal bearing on the table, his fingers humming with energy. The bearing began to spin, slowly lifting off into the air. He'd learned the trick online, a wind vortex spell that gathered stray mana into metal bearings, masking his vis traces from detection. With this method, the guild's tracking mages would have a hell of a time finding him. Weeks passed, and his progress skyrocketed. But instead of pride, he felt an aching emptiness gnawing at his chest. His escape had fallen on the same day as his mother's funeral. He never got the chance to say goodbye. Losing his parents, his wife, and his home had carved a hollow wound deep in his soul. Looking around his quiet new house, he wondered if Selene would have liked it here. But that thought vanished, replaced by the cold resolve to survive. The guild was still hunting him, and failure wasn't an option. To stay safe, he needed to learn everything about this town and blend in like a local. One day, he dropped by a small restaurant. The girl at the counter, spotting a new face, offered to recommend a dish, but something about the place felt off. His magic sense tingled. There was a massive basement beneath the building, way larger than it should have been. What really caught him off guard, though, was the presence of a gigantic dog, nearly human-sized, lurking below. His thoughts were cut short when Sheriff Arthur Langley strolled over to chat. The man was friendly, insisting he try the steaks cooked by his niece. He also spoke proudly of the local kids, respectful and well-behaved, never trespassing on anyone's property. But then, his tone shifted slightly as he mentioned the rumors. Strange people had been showing up around town lately. The sheriff asked Callum to let him know if he noticed anything strange around town. Those words hit different. Callum's instincts flared. It felt like the sheriff might have been hinting at him. But then, Arthur quickly added that he'd only warned a handful of locals and realized Callum didn't look like the type he was talking about. Still, the mage couldn't shake off the creeping thought that these suspicious people were none other than agents from the Guild of Magic Regulation. After finishing his meal, Callum headed toward his car, his mind racing. If the guild had tracked him down, it was probably because of the mark on his hand, the cursed remnant of their experiments. Getting rid of it became his top priority. He stared intently at the small sigil burned into his skin, its center pulsing faintly with magical light. That mark wasn't just decorative, it was a magical tag, broadcasting his signature as a spatial mage. Determined, he channeled mana straight into it, forcing his energy to collide with the embedded spell. The tattoo sparked violently, sending a sharp, burning pain through his arm. But Callum pushed through, gritting his teeth until a small, glowing orb emerged from the mark's center. Success! The rest of the seal would fade with time. Without hesitation, he tossed the orb into the fire and watched it vanish in a burst of sparks. The next day, his thoughts turned to the vortex spell. Maybe he could use it to store and release Vis at will. Creating portals and small spells had become routine by now, but their range still depended on his mana reserves. Then it hit him. What if he built something like a magical power bank, a system that could recharge his Viz on demand? It could save his life someday, especially if he needed to escape in a split second. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Callum froze. Could it be the guild's agents already here? Activating his magic, he peered through the door and exhaled when he saw it was Sheriff Arthur Langley. He steadied himself, opened the door, and asked what brought the sheriff around. Arthur asked where Wells, Callum's new alias, had been the night before, around 3 a.m. Callum's gut tightened. That night, he'd already sensed something was off, as if the air itself was watching him. His mind flashed back to that massive dog-like creature. The unease in his chest deepened. The truth hit him. The Langley family had to be werewolves. Everything fit too well. But another question burned in his mind. What had the sheriff really meant at the diner? Was he warning him or threatening him? Shaking off the thought, Callum tried to rest. But the peace didn't last. Strange sounds began whispering outside his window. He jumped to his feet, pulse pounding. Peering out, he saw a shadow, tall but too blurred to make out. Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped into the darkness. The yard looked empty, quiet, almost too quiet. Then came another sound, a faint rustle followed by a sudden gust of wind. Panic took hold. He bolted back inside and slammed the door shut. The next morning, the sheriff came by again, calm but serious. He told Callum not to take offense. He just needed to ask a few things. Callum said he'd been asleep but asked what had happened. Arthur inquired whether Callum had any security footage, maybe cameras around the property. Callum explained he didn't have any. Besides, he thought grimly, with all the magic training he'd been doing in the backyard, a security system would have only made things worse. The sheriff then dropped the news. There'd been a murders nearby. Old Man Hardy had been found dead, and it looked like someone had broken into his house. Callum, trying to sound calm, said he hadn't seen anything, though he admitted hearing strange noises last night. He added that he thought it might have been an animal, but that was all he knew. Arthur thanked him for the info and said he'd check back if anything new turned up. The officers left, but the sheriff lingered in thought. Something about Callum didn't sit right, like the man was hiding something. Still, neither he nor the sheriff truly believed Callum was a killer. Yet both men knew deep down who might be behind it, though Arthur prayed he was wrong. He remembered his tense talk with a vampire once, about the rule that no human blood could be spilled within Venut's pack territory. The vampire had brushed him off, saying if one of his own died, it wasn't his concern. Arthur was convinced now. The vampires were responsible for the murder. They tried to act innocent, but creatures like that always left traces. Always. The vampire just shrugged, his pale lips twisting into a smirk of indifference. He claimed ignorance, saying no bloodsuckers from his crew had stepped foot on that turf. His tone dripped with arrogance, the kind that made even the shadows flinch. Arthur swore he'd drag them into the light, one by one, if he had to. If the Vinet pack wanted to throw hands, he was ready. Fangs or claws, he didn't care. He'd face them all with the fury of a storm about to break. Rage flared in the sheriff's chest like wildfire. His fist twitched, trembling with the weight of a blow he desperately wanted to land. But the vampire's cold, unblinking stare froze him mid-swing. Gritting his teeth, Arthur ordered his deputy to take that creature away before his self-control shattered completely. Later, Arthur told Jessica the bitter truth. The vampires had started hunting civilians, and they wouldn't stop. Not until someone made them. He'd tried to reach their leader, but the one he caught was a nobody. Just another pawn in a game soaked in blood and silence. With no proof, Arthur knew the Guild of Arcane Regulation would keep their hands clean. Bureaucrats never got their boots dirty without evidence, even if people were dying. He planned to send 2 wolves from his pack, knowing full well that if they ran into vampires, no one from the guild would lift a finger to help. Something darker loomed beneath it all. This wasn't just crime. It was a prelude to something far more sinister. The question wasn't if the vampires would kill again, it was who's next. Reports from 5 other cities mirrored the chaos. If they caught even one vampire in the act, they'd have the right to wipe out the nest. Callum knew he had to stay low and keep his senses razor sharp. Money wasn't an issue, but he'd been saving for emergencies. And this was starting to look like one. Between murders and werewolves, paranoia had become his daily companion. He'd even thought about leaving Vinut, but abandoning his home felt like admitting defeat. He'd poured too much of himself and his wallet into that house. Walking away would be like burning everything he'd built. He considered selling enchanted trinkets online through magical forums, but that meant creating an account, and that meant exposure. The guild could track him in minutes. Besides, his enchanted bearings barely held a charge for 90 minutes. No one would buy junk that ran out of magic faster than a cheap flashlight. So he turned his focus inward. Strengthen the fortress, he thought. Maybe enchant the walls with gravitational wards strong enough to deflect bullets. But the magic slipped through his grasp. The spell collapsed after barely a minute. His power wasn't enough. Complex spatial techniques were locked behind the grimoires of Archmage Duval. Without access to those secrets, Callum felt like he was trying to reinvent magic itself. Each failed attempt made him feel like a rookie mage, tinkering in the dark while giants hoarded the light. Desperate, he hit up a weapons shop. Steel might not rival sorcery, but at least it didn't run out of mana. A pistol and some ammo weren't ideal, but in a world where monsters walked free, it was better than bare hands. That's when fate threw him another curveball. Jessica and her daughter were there too, picking out a hammer. He asked if the recent murder had shaken them. The women said they'd known the victim, Joan, a kind soul from their church. Callum froze. He'd assumed the dead man was James Hardy. The realization hit like a blade of ice. Jessica's voice trembled as she revealed another horror. Another murder last night. Callum felt the world tilt. If this was a serial killer, then Vinut was standing on a knife's edge. 2 deaths in such a short span meant one thing. The next could happen before nightfall. Now he faced 2 threats. A supernatural killer on the loose, and the Guild, who'd send agents once the deaths drew too much attention. Either one could show up at his doorstep before sunset. He focused his mind, tapping into his spatial awareness to monitor the area. His senses stretched outward, weaving through walls and streets like invisible threads. Enchanted bearings spun in midair. His weapon was locked and loaded, and his perception expanded until he could feel the pulse of the entire town. Jessica was guarding the cafe, eyes sharp as daggers. Clara was heading toward the store, unaware of the shadow stalking her fate. The sheriff stayed at his office, brewing plans and anger in equal measure. But exhaustion hit Callum like a tidal wave, and the moment his guard dipped, he drifted into uneasy sleep. Morning shattered his rest with Jessica's screams slicing through the dawn. Tears streaked her face as she ran toward Mr. Hall's porch, her voice breaking from panic. Callum didn't need words. His gut told him something had gone horribly wrong. When he asked what happened, Jessica's voice cracked as she shouted that they had taken Clara. His mind spun. He needed clarity, but terror clouded everything. Jessica's trembling words painted the nightmare. Vampires had ambushed Clara in an alley, their presence thick with malice. They surrounded her, their intent unmistakable, forcing her to follow into the darkness. Now she was trapped in their den, and Jessica was sure they were torturing her. She begged Callum to help, but he hesitated. Helping meant exposing what he truly was. Jessica had seen a glimpse of his real power once, before he learned to hide it. If she remembered that, things could spiral fast. Still, Callum told her to come inside. They needed to think this through before anyone else vanished. Vampires could strike again at any second, and facing them alone would be suicide. But as long as Jessica was alive, Callum had something worth fighting for, a reason to ignite the storm within. Grabbing his shotgun, Callum promised Jessica he'd do everything in his power to bring Clara back. But his tone was steady, soldier-like. He needed more intel before diving into the storm. Stepping outside, he felt the world shift. His spatial sense, that sixth sense pulsing with arcane rhythm, picked up something off, lingering nearby like static in the air. The signal pulled him toward an old hotel, a decaying relic of another era. The anomaly was there. He could feel its distortion twisting through the space like a scar on reality itself. Jessica, her voice trembling but resolute, offered another path, her family's help. She led him to a modest house on the edge of town, where Callum discovered her family's secret. They were werewolves, and most of them worked as local cops. The kind of irony fate loved to write. Sheriff Arthur greeted them, his patience hanging by a thread, frustration flashing in his amber eyes. Bringing outsiders into this mess was a dangerous play, especially when the Guild of Arcane Regulation could be watching from the shadows. But Callum didn't hesitate. He assured them he had no ties to the Guild. Not anymore. That calmed Arthur a little, though the tension in his jaw said he was still ready to snap. Soon, talk shifted to the vampires nesting in the old hotel. Their presence had poisoned the air for days. The wolves had felt it, the stench of blood magic clinging to the walls, but the Guild's restrictions kept them leashed. Arthur explained bitterly that no matter how brutal the vampires were, the pack couldn't act without proof. If they struck first, the Guild would brand them as aggressors. It was a deadly chess match. One wrong move could doom them all. Callum decided to cut through the politics. He focused, summoning his spatial perception to locate Clara. Within moments, he sensed her, trapped in one of the hotel's rooms, her life force flickering like a candle in the wind. The vampires claimed she had come willingly, trying to twist truth into mockery. But that only fed Arthur's fury. The sheriff's eyes burned. He vowed to save her and end this nightmare. Once Clara was safe, he'd summon the best pack from miles around to erase every last vampire from Vinut. Callum then asked the crucial question: how exactly were they planning to kill them? Arthur explained. Weapons made of mordite could halt a vampire's regeneration. Otherwise, the only way was a clean shot, head or heart. But mordite was rare, and bullets moved slower than vampires. That made every fight a dance with death. Jessica turned to Callum again, her voice trembling but brave. Was he truly ready to fight? He nodded with quiet certainty. He'd bring Clara back, but first he needed time, and a few special preparations. Sheriff Arthur led him into a soundproof chamber beneath the station, a sealed room, built for containment and secrecy. It was perfect, a space where no magical signatures could leak, no eyes could pry. Callum requested something odd, pillows. They were vital for the ritual. Arthur didn't get it, but he gave the order anyway, granting him 5 minutes. Callum knew what was at stake. If he failed, it wouldn't just be his problem. The wolves, the Guild, they'd all pay the price. And if the vampires found him first, his death would be slow and merciless. Meanwhile, inside the vampire den, silence ruled. They felt untouchable, certain that the wolves wouldn't dare act without Guild approval. A mage among them sneered confidently, assuring the others that her surveillance spell was still active. No one could sneak past her wards unseen. Then the air behind her rippled. A portal tore open, and through it stepped a shadow with a shotgun. The blast thundered through the room. The mage fell instantly, her blood splattering across the cracked tiles. Callum wasted no time. Using his mastery of space, he opened portals right beside the vampires' heads, firing precise shots through them without ever revealing his position. Each blast was clean, lethal, and final, an unseen hunter dismantling his prey. Through the chaos, he found Clara, chained, her magic dim, fading fast. The drain on her essence made teleportation risky, but he had no other choice. His body trembled as he forced the spatial current to bend, pulling her through the void. In a flash of light, she appeared in the soundproof chamber, safe but barely conscious. Callum rushed to her, checking her pulse, ensuring she was still breathing. Back in the hotel, panic erupted. The surviving vampires screamed and scattered, unable to pinpoint their invisible assailant. But Callum didn't stop. He kept weaving portals and firing, each move colder, faster, more precise. His mana was burning out, his vision blurring, but he wouldn't quit until the last monster fell. Outside the chamber, Arthur and Jessica waited, every second stretching into eternity. 45 seconds later, when silence finally fell, they burst in and saw Clara lying there. Jessica collapsed beside her sister, shaking but alive with relief. Arthur stood frozen, awe cutting through his rage. It was over, faster than anyone could have imagined. Callum, pale and trembling, stated what they all hoped to hear. The vampires were gone. But he added that they'd better call the fire department. The battle had set the hotel ablaze. Arthur studied him closely. Despite the carnage, there wasn't a trace of magical energy radiating from Callum. It was as if the young man had erased every echo of his own power. A ghost who burned monsters and vanished into silence. Only later did he realize that Wells had been using a concealed magic amulet, a relic designed to hide his true power from everyone's eyes. The kind of trick only a seasoned spellcaster could pull off without leaving a trace of energy behind. Callum was heading toward his car, ready to disappear into the night, when Jessica caught up to him. Her footsteps echoed across the empty parking lot, chasing after his fading silhouette. She looked a little flustered, her face carrying both gratitude and hesitation. With a quiet intensity in her eyes, she thanked him for saving Clara, her words trembling between relief and awe. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. A fleeting spark, gone in an instant, but enough to send a strange warmth through the cold air. Before he could even respond, she turned sharply and walked away, her steps quick and deliberate, leaving him standing alone beneath the flickering streetlight. The sheriff returned to his pack of werewolves, the scent of smoke still clinging to the night. Pulling out his phone, he called Alpha Chester to report that the vampire crisis had been handled. Chester was stunned. The pack hadn't intervened directly. How could the problem already be solved? His tone turned sharp, demanding every detail. Arthur explained everything, how a strange young man had stepped in, wielding powers that defied classification, saving them all before vanishing into the shadows. The sheriff confessed he wasn't sure if Callum was a mage, a werewolf, or even one of the Fae. All he knew was that the guy's actions had turned the tide. Chester ordered Arthur to keep an eye on this mysterious stranger. If Callum was truly a mage, then trust was a dangerous luxury they couldn't afford. Still, deep down, the pack knew they owed him a debt. A life debt that ran thicker than blood, even if they had no idea who he really was. The next morning, Callum stood under the shower for what felt like an eternity, the water pounding against his skin like a storm trying to wash away the past. But no matter how long he stayed there, the grime wouldn't fade. Not from his body, not from his soul. The images of the dead vampires kept flashing before his eyes. They were monsters, yes, but also living beings. And he had ended them without a flicker of hesitation. Why had it been so easy? And why now did guilt claw at his chest like a beast that refused to die? He'd barely begun studying magic, yet he'd already taken down an entire nest of bloodthirsty predators. If he truly wanted, he could become a villain so powerful the world itself would tremble before him. Maybe the guild was right to put limits on mages. Maybe the world needed chains for people like him. But then Clara would still be trapped in that hotel. He kept telling himself he'd done the right thing, yet the memory of those lifeless eyes kept tearing at his conscience. The raging fire had consumed the hotel, leaving nothing but ash and silence behind. Every trace of what happened, gone. Except for Langley. The sheriff had seen too much, knew too much. If Callum had been smarter, he would have pulled it all off without Jessica or the wolves. Clean, quiet, invisible. Now, though, his only choice was to leave Venuta, even though part of him wanted to stay just a little longer. Meanwhile, agents from the Guild of Magical Regulation arrived in town, the Mage Ray Denforth and the Fey investigator Felixia Black. Sheriff Arthur greeted them with forced calm, hoping they'd bring order to the chaos that still hung in the air like smoke. When Ray asked about the hotel incident, Arthur explained that his men were still sweeping the area and that several bodies were ready for examination. In the morgue, Danforth studied the corpses closely, his expression grim and calculating. Every wound was identical, too precise, too efficient, the work of a professional killer. The sheriff quickly assured the agents that the wolves weren't involved. They still couldn't explain how those wounds had been inflicted. Felixia raised her hand, summoning a faint shimmer of fey magic to replay the victim's final moments. Her fingers trembled as fragments of memory flickered through the air like shards of glass, half seen, half felt. The vampires hadn't even realized what killed them. One died in his sleep, another never heard the gunshot. Only one of them retained a flicker of consciousness, a flash of fear, a shadow of the killer, but no clear image. Ray concluded that whoever did this was extremely dangerous, and they'd need to stay in town to uncover the truth. The sheriff offered them a place to stay, insisting that no one local had the power or skill to pull off a massacre like that. The agents exchanged glances, silent agreement. They'd dig deeper themselves, find out whether this was the work of an outsider or something darker hidden in Venuta's heart. Callum, unaware of how close the hunters were, examined his haul from the vampire den. The stash contained pistols, shotguns, ordinary weapons, but the ammo was something else entirely. Silverite, Mordite, Corite, each designed to tear through werewolves, vampires, even fae. He kept them all. Tools of survival for whatever came next. Among the loot were also 100,000 in cash, a few gold bars and strange ceramic plates covered in runes. Callum guessed they once belonged to a mage, though their purpose was still a mystery. Everything he'd found could prove useful, but right now, his priority was fortifying his defenses and preparing for the storm he knew was coming. Then came the creak of a door opening, a sound that froze his blood. Someone was inside the apartment. Callum went still, heart hammering in his chest. Had they already found him? He quickly hid the loot, every weapon, every coin, making sure nothing incriminating was in sight. Then he opened the door. Jessica and Clara stood there, nervous but smiling, like ghosts from the night before. Their faces carried traces of fatigue and tension, but the relief in their eyes was genuine. Jessica, unable to hide her concern, asked if he was planning to leave. Rumors about his disappearance had already begun to spread across town. Clara explained that they'd come to warn him. The guild agents had arrived, and they were already digging deep into the case. Callum's brow furrowed. They'd shown up sooner than he expected. Much sooner. Before he could say anything, Clara ran up and hugged him tightly, her small frame trembling with gratitude and unspoken fear. She swore that without him, she'd be nothing but a ghost fading into the void. Callum stayed ice cold, reminding them he hadn't been at the hotel, and they'd better stick to that story. They brought him food from their cafe, knowing stepping foot there again could get him burned. Callum reluctantly let them in, his eyes sharp as blades, demanding every scrap of intel on the agents. Clara said her father had met them that morning. One could talk to the dead, but even corpses stayed silent. No vampire could recall a thing. Their minds were fogged, like shattered mirrors lost to time. Callum listened, calm but alert, realizing luck was on his side. The agents hadn't found a single clue. Clara then spoke the name Alpha Chester, the sheriff of Venuta, a wolf bound by duty and storms. He served the Midwest Pack loyally, though he feared that loyalty would demand blood in return. Meanwhile, the guild's agents wasted no breath. Their hunt moved like thunder over dark skies. Ray Danforth and Felicia Black suspected the hotel fire reeked of more than ashes. The wolf pack denied it all, but the agents could smell lies in their words. Channeling the magic of life, Ray glimpsed fractured visions, threads pulling her straight to Callum's door. 30 minutes later, they stood before his home, the storm having found its target. When Callum opened, their power hit him like a wave of raw mana. They showed their badges, guild agents of magical regulation, authority cloaked in iron will. He tensed. These two weren't like the vampires he'd crushed. They were forces of another tier. Ray began questioning him about the hotel fire, each word carrying a spell's weight. Callum stayed cool, tossing back that maybe he could use a lawyer. Felicia cut in. Lawyers wouldn't be needed. The chill in her tone made it sound like a warning. Ray pressed harder, asking if the sheriff had mentioned vampires lurking in town. Callum denied everything, claiming he'd only heard of the blaze on the news. With a sigh, Ray called off the interrogation. though suspicion still burned in her eyes. As they turned to leave, she told him not to leave the county. He was now one of the suspects. Once they were gone, panic clawed at Callum's chest. He realized they'd nearly uncovered him, and Felicia had even tried to cast a spell. They wouldn't stop. Fear sharpened his instincts. Running was his only option. Their magic resistance had marked him guilty. He packed fast, gear, relics, rifle, and hit the road. He knew the guild would tighten its grip soon. More agents were surely on their way to Venuta. Before leaving, Callum whispered an unspoken apology to Jessica and Clara, grateful for their kindness. He wanted to stay, but the Reaper's hand was already near. If he vanished, the guild would come for blood. On his way out, he spotted a car for sale, a perfect chance to ditch his own and vanish clean. He stepped into a nearby shop to find out who owned it. The seller, a werewolf with the Langley clan's faint magical scent. The man's eyes gleamed when Callum laid down a gold bar on the counter. He demanded a new ID and that car, no questions asked. 10 minutes later, the deal was done. Callum became Denver Brown, a professor with a fake past. He noted he'd need glasses to match his new identity's vibe. The seller mentioned a bookstore, Pearson's, on 5th and Main, where forbidden magic still lingered. Books were scarce thanks to guild bans, but Callum planned to visit the next day. It was late. He returned to his new ride, ready to vanish into the night. Meanwhile, a sudden portal tore open near the cellar, warping the air. A familiar voice echoed through, apologizing for the intrusion. It was Callum, contacting Alpha Chester to deliver a coded message. Clara's friend was safe. Hearing this, Chester ordered his pack to cease their hunt. Callum was too dangerous to chase blindly. Yet vengeance simmered in his blood. He wouldn't let this slide. Chester tasked Roy and John to track Callum by his magical trail, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the guild agents returned to Callum's house, the hunt reigniting under a cold moon. They knocked. Silence. The house felt hollow, breathing danger. With a flick of her hand, Ray unleashed her magic. The door burst open like thunder. Inside, the house felt hollow, like it hadn't seen life in ages. Just dust and silence breathing in the dark. The backyard was empty too, no trace of movement, just wind whispering secrets. During the search, they found a weird metal bearing hidden beneath the bed. It carried a rough enchantment, but the metal itself refused to hold any magical imprint. That hinted Callum was either a mage or had deep ties with one. Felicia examined it closely, noting that even if he wasn't a caster, someone close to him sure was. Ray pondered whether Alpha Langley might know something about that strange piece. He suggested putting out an alert for Callum's car and heading to Langley for answers. Callum woke up in his car around noon, sunlight burning through the windshield. After endless stress, it was the first night he'd actually slept deep and dreamless. But rest was a luxury. Guild agents were closing in with every ticking hour. He hoped the wolf from the shop hadn't lied about the books. Knowledge was his only weapon now. The bookstore looked old, small, and painfully ordinary. Just another corner relic. But the moment Callum stepped inside, he felt it. Dust, age, and a faint pulse of magic. It looked mundane, yet he sensed a hidden section beneath that harmless facade. The shopkeeper behind the counter gave him a cold look, words sharp as dull blades. Expecting no help, Callum drifted along the shelves, hunting in silence. The selection was trash. Cheap fantasy novels with jacked-up prices. Still, one book caught his eye. A treatise on magical defense, old but promising. As he cracked it open, the shopkeeper snapped that reading came only after buying. Callum seized the moment to ask if there were books for beginner mages. The man smirked, saying no, but his tone shifted when he heard Callum was a professor. With a lazy snap of his fingers, magic stirred the air. Several books floated up, manuals on focus, magic houses, and beginner portal craft. Callum bought 4 of them, dropping over $1,000 without flinching. Yet, as he left, frustration gnawed at him. The prices were robbery, and the man kept the change. Meanwhile, the werewolves hunting him pressed on, relentless as shadows. Callum's trail was faint, but still traceable, like smoke in the wind. They found his car parked near the bookstore and spotted security cameras watching. One suggested calling a friend who could pull the footage quietly. First, though, they wanted Lucy's input. She was the best hacker in the pack. Callum dove into reading, but the books were shallow, pages full of hollow words. The only real insight, Those ceramic plates found with the vampires were foci, tools for channeling spells. But none explained how to craft or locate them, only that they existed. Determined, Callum vowed to find another store. His hunger for knowledge burned bright. The next day, he even visited a fey shop filled with crystals and herbs, useless to him. Still, no mention anywhere about the Dragonborn. The thought of Shikue haunted him. Maybe he was something truly one of a kind. On his search, Callum found another store, its aura humming with energy. The instant he entered, raw pressure slammed into him, magic thick as storm air. A girl stood by the shelf, her aura so fierce it stole his breath. He couldn't look away, wondering what kind of being she truly was. Meanwhile, Lucy worked the surveillance feeds with Alpha Chester. Her fingers danced like lightning. Chester asked if she'd found their target. She confirmed it with casual confidence. The street cams caught him hours ago. She already had his current location. But she scolded them. Tracking alone was pointless. They'd always stay one move behind. Instead, she said, they should ask not where he was, but where he was heading. Lucy reminded Chester his team had done solid groundwork, questioning every shop owner. The pattern was clear. The man was obsessed with books and learning. Watching highway cameras, Lucy smirked. Her theory checked out. He was moving south. Lucy dropped her report like a pro, adding that Roy had mapped out every spot the guy could crash at. Word was, Professor Denver Brown had holed up in another bookstore, this one run by a werewolf. Chester thought for a second, then told her to warn the team. No contact. He wanted Brown to come to them. Lucy grinned. The boss finally caught up to her wavelength. Callum's mind spun in circles. Should he really mess with Alpha Chester? It felt insane, but deep down he knew. No other path left. If Chester was this close, Stealth was already dead. A single call might shift the board and show his next move. In an old phone booth, Callum finally dialed. To his shock, the line clicked fast. The Alpha had been waiting. He greeted Mr. Brown, but demanded to be called Mr. Hall. Grinding his teeth, Callum asked what they actually wanted from him. Chester reminded him about saving Clara, and hinted that Vineth wasn't the only bloodsucker nest. Callum, cold as steel, said he wasn't a merc. But the mention of a reward froze him. Chester offered no cash, only access to the guild's classified archives. That was worth more than gold for someone just trying to survive magic's chaos. Chester sweetened it. A meetup with a real mage expert if Callum agreed. Holding back his temper, Callum asked what the catch was. Chester explained. 4 cities on the brink. Vampires twisting politics to shatter his control. Protecting all 4? Almost impossible. Callum doubted he could pull another miracle. The guild nearly bagged him last time. Chester said time was bleeding out and offered to leave full details in a note. When Callum asked how they tracked him, Chester just laughed softly. His people had followed the scent, then matched it to his pattern. The book obsession gave him away. A trash bin nearby held a sealed folder. Inside, everything. Vampire data, mission brief, target maps. Back in the car, Callum flipped through the pages. It wasn't a file, it was a damn encyclopedia. Some cities were over 1,300 clicks apart. The mission sounded impossible for one man. But then, a spark. A dangerous, brilliant idea. If he could master short-range teleportation even rough, he'd own the battlefield. He thought about his gravity powers. Maybe he could fly. Risky as hell, but running wasn't an option anymore. He focused, drawing raw energy into his core like a storm collapsing inward. The magic roared, lifting him off the ground. For a heartbeat, perfect balance. Then the power snapped loose like a broken cable. The world spun, and he smashed into a tree with bone-rattling force. Pain flared, but nothing fatal. Just another scar for the collection. He stood, breath ragged. Without control, this power was a curse, not salvation. But the solution flickered at the edge of his thoughts. A new way to stabilize it. Meanwhile, guild agents combed the forest inch by inch. One of them spotted something odd down in a ravine. Beneath a mess of fake branches, a car. Felicia Black peeked inside. The interior was spotless. Too spotless. But the broken branches and fresh footprints screamed. The target was close. Callum found a motorcycle, charged it with gravity magic, and blasted off like a comet. The spell wrapped around the engine, turning it near invisible, eating miles in seconds. Now that mobility wasn't an issue, he aimed for one of the vampire hives. Half an hour later, he rolled up to the site. Chester had given him local alpha contacts, but Callum chose to go solo. Fewer risks, cleaner work. He activated his mage sight, scanning for the source. A cinema glowed like a beacon, drenched in dark energy. He counted 9 vampires and 1 earth mage among them. Magical shields wrapped the place, strong but only from the inside out. Getting past the outer edge was easy, breaking in without raising hell. That was the real challenge. The vamps were the real nightmare. Faster, stronger, deadlier than anything he'd ever faced. His thoughts froze as something inside the building caught his eye. A 10th vampire, carrying a little girl's body like a trophy. Rage burned in Callum's chest. Those monsters and their mage allies disgusted him. They'd pay. Grinding his teeth, he contacted Alpha Chester and accepted the deal. He needed a plan, fast, clean, invisible to the guild's watchdogs. His mind flickered to Gale, the mage girl he'd met in that quiet bookstore. They'd studied spell plates together, and this time she'd actually pulled it off, channeling power into the plate. She made the book float mid-air like it had a soul. Their small victory lit a spark. They'd promised to meet again next week. Callum checked his gear and reviewed his plan. The vamp nest had to burn, and he knew exactly how to make it happen. Tomorrow, those creatures would be nothing but ashes. He refused to repeat the hotel disaster. No guns this time. He had something better. Thermite. A metal oxide and aluminum mix. The same stuff used to weld train rails. Once lit, it burns hotter than hellfire. Over 2,000 degrees. Just the thing to melt vampire flesh down to dust. The best part? He could craft it from scrap. Rust from pipes, shredded foil. Mix them 3 to 1, and boom, instant destruction. Stuff it in a soda can, and you've got yourself a homemade grenade. Callum had built over 100 already, more than enough for one nest. He'd stash them across safe spots, carrying only a few at a time. Now he needed a heavy object for the next phase. A glance around, the perfect rock caught his eye. Inside, 2 vamps were whining about the movie being trash. Then, a portal blinked open beside them. A bomb dropped through, exploded, and flames devoured them in seconds. The others heard the blast and moved fast. But then, sprinklers erupted from the ceiling, drenching everything. The nightmare was just getting started. Another portal shimmered above one vamp and another bomb fell. The explosion wiped out several more in an instant. Callum smirked at how smooth it worked, but kept going. He teleported grenades non-stop, blitzing the nest before they could blink. The Earth Mage burst into the hallway, fire swallowing everything around. Callum didn't waste a second. Stage 2 had begun. The only unknown, how strong that mage shield really was. Bullets and thermite couldn't cut it. Time for a different kind of strike. He enchanted a rock, lifting it high with telekinesis. No one, not even a mage, stays ready forever. When the height was right, Callum ripped open a portal beneath it. The boulder slammed down with godlike force, shattering every barrier. The impact crushed the Earth Mage flat. Callum exhaled. One nest down, mission complete. He hopped on his bike and within an hour reached the next site. The burning building ahead was a graveyard. Vampires dying in waves. Meanwhile, the werewolves watched from afar, studying every move. But Callum left no trace. His work was surgical, clean, silent, lethal. His phone buzzed. Another nest wiped off the map. Alpha Chester couldn't believe it, but Callum was already locked on his third target. He activated his piercing vision, scanning every corner. A dozen vampires, one heavily shielded mage, counted. But there were 2 more, just regular humans, powerless and scared. Saving them without revealing himself was a nightmare puzzle. He paced, restless, mind racing for a plan to get them out alive. Leaving them wasn't an option, but rescuing them risked exposure. If he pulled them out, he'd need a safe zone no one could track fast. 2 blocks down, a fast food joint caught his eye, a perfect drop spot. But first, the nest had to burn. No time to waste. He mapped the weak points, spots where vamps clustered or fuel piled up. Every move was calculated. He trusted the plan. 6 thermite cans and a touch of portal paste. Enough for chaos. Portals flared open as he sent the bombs through key choke points. Within seconds, the building roared. Fire and shockwaves everywhere. The kidnapped humans screamed as panic took over. Alarms blared, flames spreading like wildfire. Then, behind them, A massive portal opened, glowing faintly. "Mask on." Callum stepped through, checking if they were safe. He told them to face forward, close their eyes, and trust him. Confused but desperate, they obeyed. A blink later, they were in a bathroom, disoriented but alive. He told them to wait until things cooled down. The girl asked if he was leaving. They still didn't know who he was. He said his name was Nobody and told them to forget his face and voice. He promised Alpha Chester would keep them safe later. As he walked away, a message popped up. The vamps were retreating. The fourth nest was gone. Finally, he could breathe. His training paid off, but his energy was burning out fast. One more fight like that and he'd be done. But it was worth it. Not just for Chester's deal, but for those 2 lives. Chester was baffled. How the hell did he pull all this off? If he had access to the guild's teleport grid, fine. But if not, then this smelled like fairy magic. Unpredictable and wild. Lucy found he barely used his phone. Every trace vanished. She was out of leads. Chester mused. If only he could move his team that fast. Jasper doubted Callum would ever share his secrets. Chester figured they needed leverage. Something better than talk. Lucy hinted she'd rather join his side than spy from afar. Chester caught her meaning. Volunteer. Dangerous move for someone tied to the guild. Lucy shrugged it off. The guild didn't care about non-mages. She could work both sides. Suddenly, the phone rang. Chester picked up to Antoine on the line. The vamp ordered him to call off his people. The nest attacks broke the truce. Chester denied everything. None of his wolves were near those zones. Antoine warned him to back off or he'd step in personally. Chester sighed in relief. At least they weren't being blamed yet. But Antoine's voice chilled the air. He'd find whoever Chester hired and make them wish the guild had killed them first. Agents scoured the ruins of the burned-out theater, searching for clues. On the floor, they found metal bearings, a calling card. Ray Denforth was sure of it. The same ghost who destroyed the last nest had struck again. The methods kept shifting, but the style stayed sharp. The suspect was leveling up fast. Felicia Black guessed the first strike might have been pure impulse, but the fresh clues screamed precision. A clean, calculated mission. Ray noted the ambush felt pro-grade, suggesting a chat with Alpha Chester since all hits landed on his turf. If Chester had no answers, the next leads were Antoine, Levine, and Raveb, power players tied to the mess. Ray believed the Fae could hold key intel, judging by the eerie signature of each kill. Meanwhile, Alpha Chester welcomed the agents, calm and confident. He said he was aware of the bloodbath at Levine's nest, but insisted he had nothing to do with it. He claimed any beef with Levine would have gone through the guild's legal path. Ray read it as a rehearsed line, too smooth to trust. Chester kept talking until his phone buzzed, slicing through the tension. He excused himself, stepping aside for the call. It was Callum, frustrated that Chester had ended their last chat too soon. Callum wasted no time, splitting and hiding the loot from the vampire dens. 5 teleport-only caches, impossible to raid without knowing his path. Chester later called back, saying the agents were unhappy with his vague answers, but had 0 real leads. He warned Callum that if anyone connected him to this, even he couldn't cover him anymore. Then came talk of payment, business as usual. Chester introduced 2 recruits to back Callum up. First was Harry, a magic analyst, sharp with grimoires and arcane data. The second, a tech whiz who went by the name Quanette. She said their line was clean from bugs and offered full digital support. Callum took her contact but kept his guard up. Trust was never free. Chester then spoke of Antoine Levine, a name laced with danger. The ruler of Minneapolis, the most ruthless vampire Chester had ever met. Chester handed over rare handwritten grimoires filled with ancient spells. Yet not a single one shed light on spatial magic, a dead end for Callum. As dusk fell, he decided to contact Quinette about her offer. She answered bright and eager, thinking he wanted to hire her. He asked for her price. She promised to send the rate sheet she used with Chester, but added that the cooler the job, the cheaper she charged. Most of her supernatural gigs, she said, were painfully dull. Callum wondered if she was a werewolf, but she shut that down quick. She was human, child of mages, born without their spark. She admitted she hated the nickname Quanette and sent her real name, Lucille Harper, along with her rates. She confessed that without Chester's protection, the guild could expose her in no time. Callum doubted Chester's reliability. The Alpha was powerful, but far from selfless. He decided she was competent, but trusting hers would be a last resort. Lucille agreed. She said Chester's influence made him untouchable, a master puppeteer of men. The worst punishment he'd ever face was a slap on the wrist. Only archmages or vampire lords could match him. Callum realized Antoine Levine wasn't just dangerous. He was a nightmare in flesh. He'd brushed off Chester's warning before, but now it hit him. Levine was an archmage-level threat. He asked Lucille to check on the couple he'd rescued and left at the diner. She dug into the data. The guild agents had already found them. Rage surged in Callum's chest. He should have protected them better. Lucille offered to find out more, but reminded him business meant payment. Callum proposed 2 kilos of enchanted gold in a hidden stash. Lucille smiled at the deal. More than fair for a job like this. The next day, Callum met with his student, Gale. She was deep in training, her telekinesis sharper and cleaner than before. Gale asked where he'd learned that spell. She'd struggled with light magic for ages. Callum said it came from a friend's advice, keeping it simple. She thanked him through a smile, proud that the spell finally flowed like second nature. Callum asked about her offensive spell progress, curious about her growth. Gale explained she'd managed to damage insects using inverted energy in an asymmetric system. Her words turned more technical, her tone confident and bright. Callum felt uneasy. Her learning speed reminded him how far behind he truly was. Meanwhile, a crucial council gathered somewhere else. Alpha Chester, wolf leader of the Midwest, awaited Antoine Levine, the vampire lord. When Levine arrived, the air thickened, tension sharp enough to cut steel. Levine mocked Chester, calling him a mutt beneath his rank. Both barely kept their rage caged behind cold words. Then Raveb, king of the Midwestern Fae, interrupted. Time to drop the drama and talk business. Archmage Jean-Ry of the guild began the meeting formally. He announced a killer stalking their lands, urging all factions to unite against the threat. Callum decided to return to Venut to check his house. To his surprise, it was untouched. The guild hadn't raided it. He guessed the Langley family had protected it, expecting he might return. His stashes of gold and cash were still there, untouched and gleaming. He took what he could carry and left the rest for future use. Costs were piling up fast. Hiring Lucille and buying enchanted gear drained his funds. He planned to leave town quietly before trouble sniffed him out. But before leaving, curiosity broke through his discipline. He went to the Langleys' home, needing to see they were safe. Using spatial sight, he saw them in a cafe nearby. Arthur chatted calmly with Jessica. Clara looked brighter, though her nightmares hadn't fully faded. Jessica still struggled to remember what happened. Vampire spells left her mind hazy. They spoke about their luck. Grateful Callum had saved Clara. Then a motorcycle roared outside. Jessica ran to the yard, spotting a rider she couldn't recognize. Callum knew he was too close, too visible. To keep the Langleys safe, he had to vanish from their lives again. Staying near them meant the guild would find them, and him, eventually. Later, he discussed teleport circles with Lucille. She was shocked he didn't know their locations. The guild used them constantly. She promised a list of public circles, but warned private ones were locked tight. Callum learned the guild could travel hundreds of kilometers through them. His own teleport range, just 150 meters, felt like a cruel joke. Lucille mentioned one circle hidden in a mattress store, magic in plain sight. Callum realized how guarded these circles were. Stealth was his only play. His teleport left a faint signature that could be tracked, though it faded before agents arrived. But Jessica once sensed his presence right after he warped, a flaw he couldn't ignore. Improving teleportation became his new obsession, key to surviving what's ahead. Hiding behind a tree, he activated his spatial sight and found a portal's shimmer. The distance blurred its details, too far to decode its structure. Knowing these circles were crafted through intricate magical blueprints, he began sketching. He had to get closer to uncover how the guild built and powered their transport system. With the diagram complete, Callum summoned his own gate and stepped through, ready for what came next. The talks between Chester and the vampire kept dragging on, the tension so thick you could slice it with a blade of mana. Chester asked if Antoine Levine really believed the killer was real. Levine was sure of it, and swore that Beast worked for the werewolves. Chester shut that down hard, denying every bit of it like his life depended on it. But Levine snapped, demanding Archmage Jean-Ry publicly call out Chester for stirring trouble instead of solving it. Raweb, the Fairy King's rep, cut in cold, saying this wasn't up for debate and the vamps were just making a scene. He warned them not to go throwing accusations unless they had something solid to back it up. Jeanri stepped in, reminding everyone that the vampire nest attacks were still under investigation, and the werewolves were officially cleared. The council wasn't called to fan the flames, but to face one truth. There was a killer out there. The hits were aimed at vamps for now, but Jeanri warned that no race was safe once that kind of darkness took root. The guild saw the killer as a threat to every being under their watch. If the wolves weren't behind it, something else was. Jeanri pulled out a small bearing, asking if anyone recognized it. The air went dead quiet. Meanwhile, Callum's mind drifted to Gale. If she came from a powerful house, teleportation was probably her norm. No way a girl like her took public transit just to reach his lessons. He checked the data Lucy sent. The nearest teleport circle was tied to a bookstore nearby. He stopped in front of a jewelry shop, feeling the hum of magic under his feet. The circle there looked just like the one he'd seen before. Same flow, same runic pulse. He planned to copy its design and feed it into his arcane KD for a full blueprint. But to get accurate readings, he'd need to move closer. Every sigil detail mattered. Suddenly, his senses flared. Someone was approaching, and their mana signature hit like déjà vu. It had to be her. The teleport's residual aura led straight to the girl. He saw how the energy wrapped around her wrist, glowing faintly like it recognized her. Interesting. The circle seemed to sync with her tattoo, reacting like it was keyed to her mark. That explained a lot. If each mage's tattoo acted as a personal access key, it could unlock guild circles. It also meant the guild could track every mage's in and out movement. Typical control freaks. If only he could get close enough to study the Matrix. He might finally crack their teleportation system. Not long after, Gale walked into the shop asking the clerk if he'd seen Professor Brown. She looked puzzled. He usually arrived before her. The clerk mumbled that he'd been buried in books for a while. She sighed, thinking maybe he'd forgotten about their lesson. Meanwhile, Callum nearly blew his cover. He dropped a small bearing near the shelves while watching her. He'd totally spaced that she was supposed to meet him for training. Gale wanted to learn more about movement magic. Tough stuff, even for gifted mages, especially since healing magic had almost zero overlap with teleportation spells. If it were basic elemental magic, life would have been way easier. Callum remembered his own early struggles with spatial orbs, endless failures and late nights. Gale asked if he knew any real movement spells. He said he knew the basics of gravity magic. Not exactly a lie, but not the full truth either. A true mage would have spotted the gaps in his mastery instantly. Callum feared that if she saw through him, his real identity could be blown. She asked to see his spell. He nodded, deciding to give her a safe little demo. He altered gravity around a chair. It floated gently like caught in a breeze. Just a simple levitation trick, but nowhere near his full potential. With some rest, he could have shown her something truly jaw-dropping. Gale's eyes lit up. She wanted to learn it too. Callum promised he'd teach her. For a moment, he felt like he was finally fitting into his role. Then his phone buzzed, slicing through the moment. It was Lucy. She said she'd found new info about the two people he'd asked about. Things were messy, but the guild had a clear rulebook for this kind of thing. Anyone who dragged normal humans into the magic world had to take full responsibility. Which meant Callum was now accountable for those people himself. Even though he saved them, the vamps moved first. Now, the guild planned to hand the victims right back. Callum couldn't believe it. Giving them back to their killers? That was straight-up insanity. But the guild only cared about one thing: rules above reason. Furious, he demanded Lucy send every name and location tied to the vamps and guild agents while opening a new portal. Lucy caught on fast. She warned him, attacking the guild was pure suicide. But Callum's resolve burned hot. He ordered her to give the names anyway. To outsiders, the place looked like a boring office tower. But behind the glass facade and cameras hid the guild's main HQ in Kansas City. Standing before it, Callum took a deep breath, weighing every move. He asked Lucy to list every vampire agent tied to the department. She hesitated. This kind of dig was risky even for her. She knew he was furious, but assured him she still had his back. Still, his plan to storm the guild's HQ felt like walking into death's arms. Callum couldn't abandon those innocent people to their fate. The guilt hit deep. If he'd taken them somewhere else, none of this would have happened. Now, to protect what mattered, he had to set things right. Lucy told him to think smart. She reminded him that others depended on him. He couldn't throw it all away for revenge. Callum agreed, but insisted she send the agent list anyway. The more he knew, the better he could strike. Knowledge was power. Lucy promised she'd handle it, but urged him to stay cautious. Later, he thought about how much he owed her. Lucy had his back when no one else did. But before taking on the guild, he needed to sharpen his power, strengthen his magic. He swore they'd pay. Every one of them would face the storm he was building. The next day, Jasper hit him with a strange question about young mages. He asked why Callum was so curious about kids showing early magic, and those who never awakened. Jasper, not being a doctor, guessed it came from low mana or weird energy imbalances. Any kid raised in a mana-rich home would soak in vis like air. So if a child grew up outside that world, their power might just stay dormant. Jasper hadn't seen a case like that, but it made sense. Callum remembered his first time using magic, during the attack at the fitness club. Maybe that's when he first felt vis surge through him, even though his parents weren't mages. He'd always wondered what it was like to grow up in a mage family. Jasper joked maybe he had a secret kid somewhere. Callum said if that were true, he wouldn't be talking about it, then thanked him for the talk. Later, he spoke with Lucy. He asked if everyone in her family were mages but her. She confirmed it, saying that's why the guild made her a courier. They didn't know what to do with a non-mage, so they dumped her in the IT division. She flipped the question back. What about his family? Callum remembered Jasper asking the same thing. Maybe Chester was trying to dig for info. Still, he didn't blame them. Everyone was curious about the mysterious new mage. He deflected, saying his life wasn't that interesting, but maybe someday he'd share more. Lucy teased that they could trade stories. On their first date, he said he wasn't sure he was ready for that. They parted ways soon after. Callum went to meet his student, Gail. She complained the textbooks were putting her to sleep. She grabbed his hand, saying she owed him big. He'd helped her a ton. He only asked one thing: help him find new movement methods. The guild's teleport circles worked fine, but he wanted something more compact, more personal. Gail recalled her dad using something called a home bond and offered to show it. Callum agreed. His friend's theories on teleportation were waiting to be tested. Gail guessed one of the runes screamed teleportation and asked if his buddy was some space-bending prodigy. She warned him. Leaking that kind of secret could wreck lives if the master caught wind. The guild watched spatial magic like hawks circling prey. Rumor said if Archmage Duval found out, that mage would vanish into nothing. Gail promised Callum she'd ask her father about bringing the home bond for testing. A portable travel tool made perfect sense. Guild circles were a total grind. She trusted the professor. His vibe screamed pro-level confidence. Suddenly, her assistant popped up, asking if Gail was heading home. The girl asked to escort her to the private teleport grid. Inside the chamber, Gail froze. Every portal was loaded, an impossible sight for a private line. The assistant whispered the guild had gone into overdrive lately. So many mages were warping through that the network was overheating. Gail stepped into the light and blinked home. Her butler, Jamerson, greeted her with perfect posture and calm eyes. She liked her study partner, but his demands sometimes felt absurd. Jamerson reminded her that greatness carried a price. She was heir to a legacy. Later, her father took a rare break to speak with her. He said tension was boiling inside the guild. A vampire hunter had thrown everything off balance. The word hunter made her pulse spike. The name alone felt dangerous. She mentioned that her grandfather, Archmage Hargrave, might visit soon. While talking, she asked her father for permission to borrow the home bond for research. He said only archmages could touch that relic. It was Duval's own creation. Yet, for his daughter, he agreed, warning her not to awaken its core. A week later, Gail met Callum again and handed him the home bond. One look, and he saw. The artifact was sealed, bound to her father's mark. But his spatial sense sliced through layers of hidden enchantment. The system inside was wild, complex, elegant, but possible to rebuild. Meanwhile, guild agents hunted the vampire slayer, chasing shadows again. Interrogations of shifters, fae, and vamps all hit dead ends. Investigator Ray Denforth figured the perp would slip up sooner or later. He thought the hunter wasn't killing for pleasure, but for someone close. Felicia Black added her theory. The hunter had allies, unseen but active. If one of them cracked, the whole network would collapse. After a few failed engraving attempts, Callum's hands finally stopped shaking. The last spark hit, the device was done. If it worked, he'd hold a living, breathing home bond in his palm. All that remained was to fill the ring with vis. As it charged, light pulsed, then space folded in on itself. The next instant, he crashed into his bathtub with a splash and a curse. Not the smoothest landing, but it was a solid win. Just a couple of days, and he'd built a working teleporter. He realized then, spatial magic wasn't just complex, it was infinite. Duval kept every spatial mage under her cold iron grip. The less others understood the craft, the more power she hoarded. That meant Callum stood in far deeper danger than he ever guessed. A rogue spatial mage could shatter Duval's empire, and the guild knew it. Meanwhile, his student cracked the mystery of the plate's flow. She drew in mana, steady breath, sharp focus, faith unshaken. Power surged through the circle, lines burning bright and alive. The shield flared to life, weak, but enough to pass the test. Everything worked perfectly, and the girl couldn't hide her joy. She promised to return next week with results, and would ask for help again if the teachers demanded more. Then she noticed a bruise on his arm and asked if he was okay. Callum blinked, remembering he probably slammed into the tub mid-teleport. Gale offered to heal him. For her, that was child's play. After all the help he gave her, it was the least she could do. She touched the wound, light flowed, and the bruise melted away. Saying goodbye, she mentioned needing to register for exams before she forgot. Suddenly, Callum caught her hand. He urged her never to let anyone drag her down. He believed in her power. She smiled softly, thanking him for the faith. The next day, Gale faced her exam. A professor reviewed her record. Healing was her strong suit, so they skipped that test. Next came light magic. She summoned glowing orbs, their shine pure and steady. Then she rose into the air, showing off her teleport skill. Landing smoothly, she wrapped herself in shimmering mana, forming a shield. The examiner nodded, flawless, and asked for offensive magic. She'd trained hard for this, but still felt her pulse race. Channeling power through her hands, she fired at the training dummy. Seconds later, the figure cracked from the inside out. Pride surged. She'd done it. She explained her spell, a healing strike that clotted blood within. The professor jotted notes, then said he needed to verify something important. 4 long hours later, her patience snapped as guild agents entered the room. Frightened, she asked if she had failed the exam. Ray Denforth replied it wasn't about grades. He was intrigued by her healing strike. When asked if she invented it, she said no. A professor named Brown had taught her how to disrupt inner body processes. Denforth frowned. That could cause serious issues, and demanded all she knew about Brown. Meanwhile, Callum contacted Lucy, who said the guild was furious over the Hunter case. Many vampires hid underground, fearing new attacks, though things had quieted for weeks. Callum asked about House Hargrave. Lucy couldn't believe he wanted to mess with that bloodline. Turns out, he'd met a girl named Gale, and her family intrigued him. Lucy checked her records. 22 years old, gifted mage. What she found about her lineage was disturbing. House Hargrave, ancient, dangerous, creators of lethal battle magic. Archmage Hargrave himself defined what combat sorcery meant. Yet Gale was a healer. That hinted at mixed heritage. Callum guessed a Hargrave once mingled blood with a healer, giving birth to Gale. Maybe they'd tried to craft a new kind of prodigy, and succeeded. If anyone threatened her, the Hargraves would unleash hell. Touching Gale meant crossing a line no one survived. Callum thanked Lucy. Things had just turned deadly. He thought of skipping their next meeting, but knew disappearing would raise alarms. He'd go, say goodbye, then vanish. Meanwhile, guild agents armed up for the final move. Felicia Black questioned if chasing one killer was worth such force. After all, Archmage Hargrave alone could erase a city. When he learned his granddaughter was being used, he demanded to join the hunt. Soon after, agents locked onto a new target, a gravity mage. He warped out in a flash, slipping through their grasp like smoke in the wind. But the sensors caught him again, this time near a small magic shop. Ray gave the silent command to capture on sight. Team A launched a suppression bracelet, its core humming with anti-magic runes. The mage tried to bolt, pouring mana into his legs to escape. The device latched onto his wrist mid-run, locking tight like a steel serpent. His knees buckled as his energy drained out, mana bleeding into the air. Golden restraints of condensed magic wrapped his body, freezing him in place. Team A confirmed the target's capture to command. Then thunder cracked. A bolt of lightning ripped through the clouds. From that storm emerged Archmage Gale's father, his presence bending the air itself. The old man demanded justice for whoever dared touch his granddaughter. Ray tried to explain the operation, insisting the suspect wouldn't escape. The Archmage relented, but ordered to be kept informed. Ray turned back to his unit, ordering a full search of the detainee. One of the soldiers found a small metal ball, a bearing, cold and worn. In Ray Denforth's mind, the pieces connected. This was the Vampire Slayer. Hours later, Callum woke in a dim room that smelled of old steel and spells. It didn't take long for him to realize this was an interrogation chamber. Shackled wrists, magic dampeners, everything screamed guild custody. His memory flickered. He was heading to meet Gale before the ambush. He cursed himself for not teleporting the moment he sensed another mage nearby. The door creaked open, and agents Ray Denforth and Felicia Black stepped in. They called him by his real name, Callum Wells. The truth hit hard. His identity was no longer a secret. One division had hunted the space mage. The other sought the assassin. None of them realized those two were the same man. The agents made it clear. Questions were coming. Felicia's truth-binding spell filled the room as she asked about the vampire nest in Venute. Callum frowned, wondering why they thought he was involved. Ray revealed the clue. The ball bearings he always used in combat. But what they truly wanted was his reason. He said the vampires had murdered humans. Felicia countered that vengeance wasn't justice. Rage flared in him. He slammed the table, accusing the guild of doing nothing. Felicia pressed again, asking who he really worked for. Callum claimed independence. He answered to no one but himself. Ray smirked, saying they might have been allies under different stars. But right now, Callum was the enemy, and the law would crush him. The agents then brought up his connection to Gale. The Bureau suspected him of teaching her forbidden techniques. Callum insisted he'd only shared basic knowledge. Felicia warned that even that could ruin Gale's future. He argued it was just biochemistry, knowledge any doctor could grasp. But the agents accused him of corrupting magic with his human science. Voices rose, anger clashing in the air like swords. The restraint on his wrist sparked, electrocuting him to force calm. Felicia repeated the question. Was he trying to recruit Gale? Callum denied it, saying he only wanted to nurture her thirst for knowledge. The agents refused to believe, thinking he'd manipulated her for his own goals. Then Callum's tone shifted. He admitted he was only buying time. Ray couldn't figure out what Callum meant. Every spell in the chamber was sealed tight. But then the air trembled as mana started to gather around the mage. He had hidden an enchanted ring inside his own body, a place no scanner could reach. Before the agents could even move, the runes flared with light. A portal burst open, and Callum vanished into it, leaving nothing but sparks behind. Ray triggered a level 4 alert, summoning every available agent in the region. Meanwhile, Callum sped through the night on his bike, engine howling as he fled the city. Felicia remembered the scan that showed no trace of a home bond seal on him. Now it was clear. Someone had implanted the artifact inside him, an almost impossible feat. She wondered who could pull that off, since only Archmage Duval forged such items. Maybe someone else had learned her craft, but that was highly unlikely. Felicia suggested tracking him by blood magic, though the spell's range barely reached 15 kilometers. She knew this failure would anger Duval, and indeed, the Archmage was furious. Duval discovered that a spatial mage had been detained without her knowledge, violating her authority. She vowed that those who kept secrets from her would pay the price. Agent Jan tried to calm her, reminding her that the real issue was the forbidden magic tied to Callum. Duval explained why healing magic in the wrong hands was pure chaos. When used defensively, it could bypass any magical defense. Worse still, Gale Hargrave now wielded that same technique, turning her into a threat. Her grandfather's influence still protected her reputation, but without him, she'd already be branded a criminal mage. Jean asked if Duval could share more intel on Callum himself. Duval said that spatial magic was the most peaceful art, yet she needed to know his lineage. Such mages were born once in 40 years. Her command was absolute. Callum Wells had to be captured. Meanwhile, Callum was already executing his contingency plan, retrieving hidden caches across the state. Clothes, weapons, cash, even study notes. Everything he needed to restart from scratch. But he knew one fatal mistake. He had let them uncover his identity. He decided to contact Lucy just to confirm she was safe. She assured him all was fine and mentioned that she'd secured the research data. Callum asked if she knew where he could find durable magical gear. Lucy explained that such equipment was heavily restricted, but could sometimes be found beyond portal worlds. Taking relics from other realms was illegal. But after today, Callum's record hardly mattered. Lucy also warned him Archmage Duval was beyond furious. As the spatial Archmage, she oversaw all other mages of the same domain. If she caught him, he wouldn't live to regret it. By nightfall, Callum neared the borders of the Fey lands. Lucy had sent him intel. Fey magic operated on principles alien to human sorcery. Their powers were diverse, yet rarely overwhelming. Suddenly, Callum sensed presences ahead, light, elusive, and not human. Shapes emerged from the mist, definitely not mortals. Dryads stepped forward first, their skin like living bark. Then came pixies and Fey, wearing necklaces strung with human ears as trophies. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a group of lost humans fled from monsters in panic. Exhausted, a girl named Hannah stumbled, barely able to move. The boy with her urged her on. Stopping meant death, with predators close behind. He made it clear. Slowing down was a death sentence, just like it was for those who fell earlier. Elsewhere, Callum's mind flashed back to a memory from childhood. He once begged his father to let him play on the slide. His father agreed, warning him to stay where he could be seen. Callum played joyfully until he saw two boys arguing nearby. One claimed the playground belonged to him, the other insisted it was free for all. The first boy shoved the other, calling him a loser as dust kicked up under their feet. Callum kept playing, pretending it wasn't his problem, lost in his own world. Then his father appeared, eyes sharp, asking why he hadn't stepped in to help. Caught off guard, Callum mumbled that he was just waiting for his turn. His father told him that being older meant stepping up for others. Evil wins only when good people stand aside. Those words carved deep into Callum's heart. That lesson stayed with him, echoing through the years like a distant spell. Now fate tossed him into another moment of choice, one that would test his core. If the Fae were truly hunting humans, he couldn't just look away. But any move might expose him to the Magic Regulation Guild still tailing him since the vampire case. The smart play was to bail, open a portal, vanish, and let the chaos fade. But then, that sharp, bone-deep sound hit his ears, something familiar and dangerous. It was the Fae and their monstrous kin, gathering under the moonlight. They had time before dawn, enough to finish their twisted hunt. Feeling their movement through mana ripples, Callum's pulse quickened. He knew walking away wasn't an option. His father's voice wouldn't let him. He expanded his spatial field to 600 meters, tracking every Fae heartbeat. Remaining unseen was tough, but he held focus, counting every movement in the dark. If anyone slipped from view, he'd blink across space and reset the plan. 24 bullets, enough to fight, not to kill. He wasn't here for blood. His mission was clear. Rescue the humans and get them to safety. A nearby mountain cave would serve as a temporary hideout. It wouldn't hold forever, but it could outlast the hunt till dawn. Hannah collapsed mid-run, drained of every ounce of strength. The boy with her lifted her up, pushing forward despite fading hope. Then he spotted a shadow moving through the brush, closing in fast. The stranger's voice cut through the tension, ordering the shape to stop. Seeing their fear, he softened his tone, letting them know he was an ally. There was no time for talk. They had to follow his lead if they wanted to live. He pointed them toward a lone pine 180 meters ahead, their only safe point. He'd guard them from afar. Direct magic near them could give him away to the Fae. Doubt lingered, but survival won. They ran toward the pine through the mist. Reaching it, they paused, waiting for the mysterious mage to reappear. Suddenly, the ground pulsed. A portal snapped open beneath their feet. They screamed as gravity flipped, landing hard but alive on cold earth. Callum appeared beside them, apologizing for the rough drop and lack of warning. They were now a full kilometer away from where the hunt had been raging. He questioned them, wanting to know why the Fae were after them. They said it was a wild hunt, monsters playing a sick game until sunrise. Rage burned in Callum's chest. The Fae treated slaughter like sport. Without hesitation, he opened another portal. Ending this madness was the only way. The Fae began to sense the shift. Something was wrong with the hunt. The sun was still hours away, yet their numbers were dropping fast. Confusion spread as portals opened under several dryads, dragging them into the void. The rest froze, terrified. Unable to grasp what kind of magic struck them, they decided to alert their monarchs. This wasn't part of the game. Then, out of nowhere, a massive boulder lifted into the air by unseen force. The mana vanished. The stone crashed down, crushing several Fae instantly. One survivor spotted Callum on a mountain ridge and shouted the order to attack. A dryad drew her bow. The arrow shimmered with lethal enchanted energy. The arrow shot forward like lightning, slicing the air with a high-pitched scream. Callum opened a portal just in time, vanishing before it hit. He warped several pixies into tiny portals, erasing them from the field. But it wasn't enough. Those creatures were blindingly fast, too quick even for his reflexes. Each passing second drained his focus. Time was slipping through his fingers. A sudden rustle behind him broke his concentration. A massive branch shot toward him like a javelin launched by the gods. The impact slammed him to the ground, knocking the breath out of his lungs. He drew his gun in a flash, instincts taking over. Fear surged as he fired blindly into the trees, chasing the unseen. Then the dryad appeared behind him, her presence silent and cold. The hit to his back sent him flying forward, smashing hard against a stone. He couldn't believe how the creature had moved without a single sound. Magic. It had to be cloaking itself with nature's flow. Callum triggered his detection ability, scanning for hidden life energy. The signal pulsed. The dryad was fused inside the tree itself. He slashed through the trunk with his blade, forcing her out into the open. It clicked. She was phasing between trees, using them as anchors. Callum aimed his weapon, ready to finish it. But the dryad blinked away, slipping into another tree's shadow. Only an unpredictable strike could beat her speed, one she couldn't anticipate. He centered his breathing, tracking her rhythm through the mana field. Then he opened a portal right beside her hiding spot, timing it perfectly. A gunshot burst through the rift, hitting the dryad square in the head. There was no thrill in it. She'd hunted humans for sport. Such cruelty didn't deserve mercy. Callum teleported her body away, burying the evidence in the void. Meanwhile, an elf woke up in a dark cave, gasping for air. The stench of blood filled his lungs as panic set in. He stumbled forward, only to find his entire squad slaughtered. His scream echoed through the cavern, swallowed by shadows. Elsewhere, Callum safely guided the survivors out of the forest. They tried to thank him, but he refused. Their memory of him had to vanish. He knew the trauma they carried would scar them, but healing was their path alone. Later, Callum contacted Chester for advice. He told him about the Fae skirmish and wondered how bad the fallout might be. Chester recognized the names: pixies, dryads, elves, the noble Fae bloodlines. Their monarchs would demand vengeance for what had happened. Chester offered him protection in exchange for loyalty, but Callum declined. After his clash with the guild, freedom meant everything to him. He agreed to occasional missions, but never chains of obedience. After the call, Chester turned to Lucy, asking her thoughts on Callum. She said he'd grown bolder since escaping the guild's grip. But now, his actions drew far too many eyes. Chester ordered her to dig into his past, every secret, every trace. Just months ago, Callum had been an ordinary man. No hint of power. Someone powerful had to be backing him, maybe blood tied to the arcane. Reaching the airport, doubt began to cloud his focus. Chester's words echoed. He needed a real safe zone, far from magical threats. Even small towns like Vinut weren't safe anymore. They always found him. Only one path remained, the realm of portals. Callum first heard about it the day he awakened his magic, thanks to Agent Sen. That realm was locked behind layers of protection, guarded by elite mages who let no outsider in. Still, Callum believed he could slip through the cracks. The real challenge was its location, far across the ocean. The airport was crawling with security, and any ticket could be traced in seconds. Blending into the crowd, he kept running scenarios through his mind. Suddenly, he brushed past a girl who felt the impact, but turned to find no one there. Callum was testing his new invisibility spell. It was a project he'd developed with Gale, and the results exceeded expectations. But he knew that one careless move could expose him. That's when he noticed a thief sprinting off with a lady's purse, security chasing close behind. He told himself to stay out of it. Yet seeing the terrified old woman, he couldn't just walk away. Without casting any visible magic, he formed a phantom tripwire. The thief hit the ground hard. Security tackled him before he could rise. Callum's sharp eyes caught the glint of an access card on a guard's belt. Seconds later, he swiped it and slipped into a restricted corridor. Meanwhile, King Gesariel examined the scorched battlefield where his kin had fallen. Flattened grass, cracked stone, and broken branches told the tale of a mage who disrespected nature. The king reached down, channeling the earth to reveal the truth. The ground showed him Callum's face and every moment of the fight. Gesariel didn't recognize this human, but his power intrigued him. Though he despised most fairies, honor demanded vengeance for the slain. He followed the magical scent carried by the wind. It led his army straight to the airport. The forest-born warriors halted outside the steel giant of glass and noise. Airport guards confronted them, shouting for the strangers to leave. Fury flared in Gesariel's chest like wildfire. With hands formed of twisting roots, he seized a guard and crushed his skull. The scream echoed before silence fell, lifeless and cold. Realizing human attention would soon arrive, the king ordered a swift retreat. They vanished into the wind, leaving chaos behind. Branches burst from the corpse they'd abandoned. Callum now sat aboard a plane bound for the unknown. Few passengers were on board, giving him space to disappear into the restroom. His reflection showed wounds from the Dryad fight, deep, raw, and unhealed. He wished for Gale's gift of restoration, her healing touch that once saved him. Guilt gnawed at him. He had driven her toward forbidden magic. Her only mistake had been crossing paths with him. Maybe one day he'd make it right. Hours later, the girl from the airport met with King Gesariel. She was part of the Mage Regulation Guild and had answered his signal. The king told her he had hunted a criminal, but a storm had ruined his pursuit. A human mage had interfered, and now the guild needed to bring that man to justice. Soon after, investigator Ray Denforth arrived. The king described the magic he'd witnessed, energy that tore through reality itself. Ray instantly recognized the culprit. Callum, a rogue mage linked to the vampire massacre. He demanded the coordinates of Callum's last sighting to begin the hunt. Meanwhile, Callum reached Matterhorn, Switzerland. Before him shimmered a gateway to the Dragon Realm, one of the deadliest worlds in existence. Only one mage stood guard at the portal, which instantly struck Callum as strange. He figured the system here wasn't built for total security, just enough to keep human world risks low. Keeping his mana output minimal, he decided to sneak through unseen. A pebble flicked from his fingers, landed near the guard's boots, drawing attention. As the man reached for his radio, confused by the random noise, Callum slipped past, fading into the shimmering gateway. One step later, the world around him transformed. The realm of dragons. Its raw beauty hit him like a tidal wave. The air itself pulsed with mana, thick enough to feel against his skin. The portal's architecture was beyond anything he'd ever studied or built. He considered sketching notes, but froze at the sound behind him. Flames surged, wrapping his body in searing pain. A dragon loomed, guardian of this realm, furious at the trespass. It demanded that the mortal pay for defiling sacred ground. But the rage shifted into shock as the beast recognized his name. The dragon was Shahayim, someone Callum already knew. At the same time, Agent Sen's phone buzzed with an alert. A strike team was being formed to capture Callum Wells. No one believed one runaway could cause such a meltdown. He had flipped the entire guild on its head, vanishing like a ghost. Sen, humiliated by the escape, now burned with the need for payback. Meanwhile, Callum spoke with Shahayim amid the mana-saturated air. The dragon distrusted the guild and wondered what drove Callum here. Callum explained he wasn't chasing anyone, just hiding from the world. Even if the guild or fairies searched the dragon realm, they'd never succeed. None dared challenge creatures born of pure elemental force. Shahayim revealed that dragons could forge or destroy matter at will, beings vast enough to dwarf continents. When Callum asked about the gym attack, Shahayim brushed it off as a personal dispute. Then, to demonstrate his craft, the dragon morphed into a chef, an avatar form. These avatars were puppets. His true form was far too immense to walk Earth. Callum realized he'd been seeing Shahayim's true form all along. The dragon mused it might be a rare gift, something inherited from his father. Talk shifted to Callum's past. His grandparents had raised him as their own. His mother had run away young, returning pregnant before vanishing again soon after. Now Callum understood why that subject had always been locked away. The pain ran too deep, Shahaim warned him not to stay here long. Dragons avoided meddling in mortal affairs, but he had to caution him of the risk. When asked about safer places, the dragon listed a few. The safest was the fairy kingdom, though unpredictable and treacherous. The Nightlands suited warriors preparing for war with the guild. There, he could harvest rare magical resources for the coming fight. Shahaim reminded him that the supernatural world was split between the strong and the broken. Shifting into his colossal form, he urged Callum to walk the path of strength. Meanwhile, Ray Denforth received a ping from the Department of Secret Investigations and headed to Agent Arthur. But Arthur had no fresh leads to share. He recalled that Callum once lived under another name, quiet and distant from everyone. When asked about European ties, the sheriff just shrugged. Their small town wasn't built for big conspiracies. While Ray struggled to move the case forward, his partner, Felicia Black, squeezed info from a young werewolf named Clara. Through subtle mind tricks, Clara revealed vampires had kidnapped her, and a mysterious man had saved her life. That confirmed the theory. The first massacre had a personal cause, but no fresh leads came from it. The investigation was bleeding out. They needed a spark fast before it flatlined. Callum stood before the portal to the Nightlands, the air thick with danger. Security here was way tighter than at any other gate. But the barrier spells looked sloppy, full of cracks. If the Dragon Realm was a high-tech vault, this one felt like a busted school locker. Too easy to be real, but there was only one way to find out. Summoning a silent rift, Callum slipped through the wards unseen. Neither guards nor enchantments could catch his trace. The moment he crossed, the light vanished. Where daylight ruled before, here was endless night. Maybe this land never knew the sun. Looking around, he spotted a small settlement ahead. To his surprise, it wasn't just vampires. Mages lived here too. Shahaim once said mages were banned from dragon realms, but the Nightlands played by no rules. This world was a haven for outcasts and runaways. Mages who hated humans and vampires coexisted here, explaining the lax defenses. Heavy wards would only choke their freedom of movement. But Callum quickly realized this wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap. The Nightlands swarmed with predators who'd cage or kill him without a blink. In the distance, a pack of vampires tore through a group of wolves. One of them froze, catching a strange scent. A female vampire asked if her partner sensed it too, but all he smelled was blood. It was odd. Few mages dared walk these cursed lands. She called her operator to report the anomaly. The order came quick, return to base immediately. They exchanged wary glances. Maybe this find was bigger than they thought. At the base, they were met by High Magus Tyson, an envoy from the Bureau of Arcane Security. Surprised to see a mage instead of a general, the scouts shared what they'd found. Tyson pressed them. Were they sure it was a mage? The vampire said the scent was human, but she couldn't identify the magic type. Tyson explained his reason for being there. A rogue mage was hiding within the portal worlds, a serious threat to balance. His power level was still unclear, but the Bureau ranked him at top-tier danger. The name dropped like thunder. Callum Wells. Every scout went on high alert. Callum was already deep within the Nightlands. Vampires weren't the main threat here. It was the moon itself. Its pulse shook the ground like a living heartbeat. The world here was breathing, restless, aware. He knew he needed to find the cenotes, reservoirs of arcane energy, but the path ahead was chaos disguised as destiny. That night, while searching for one, a strange noise pulled him from his tent. He saw a massive beetle locked in battle with a wooden beast. The beetle was a blood feeder nesting near cenotes, exactly what he sought. He decided to track it, hoping it would lead him to the source. The wooden monster had the upper hand. The beetle was seconds from death. He couldn't leave evidence of his presence behind. Magic was his only play now. Opening a rift beside the creature's arm, he redirected its strike, impaling itself clean through. Once the blood feeder fled, Callum followed, his steps silent under the moon's pulse. Callum found the creature's lair, a cavern crawling with blood feeders. At the bottom shimmered a strange liquid glow, humming with arcane energy. He instantly recognized it as a magical resource of rare potency. He decided to extract it through precise spellwork. As his power pulsed, a stone surfaced, a fragment of condensed magic. But his spell stirred the nest. Monsters began to rise, tentacles thrashing from the pool. The air thickened with danger, yet Callum stayed cool under pressure. He warped the dead wooden beast above the lake, dropping it like bait. The massive creature lunged and devoured it whole. That gave him an opening. He snatched everything he could through a quick portal, then vanished without leaving a trace behind. Hours later, agents arrived, the residue of Callum Wells's magic still burning in the air. They reported to High Magus Tyson, sure that with swift action they could corner him. Tyson advanced toward the portal network. Step 1 was sealing Callum's escape routes. The fugitive was close. When they breached the chamber, he was already stepping into the shimmering gate. The agents dove in right after him, chasing his fading aura. His trace reappeared in the Nightlands, and every radar in the Bureau locked on his trail. Lethal force was a last resort. The target had to be taken alive. Feeling the hunt closing in, Callum blinked 1 kilometer west through teleportation. One agent locked aim, receiving clearance to shoot. The bullet ripped through the air, but Callum had already vanished into another portal. The guild was faster than expected, tightening the net, but for some reason, his home bond connection suddenly failed. Still, Callum ignored pain and fatigue, pushing through sheer willpower. He opened hundreds of portals in a frantic chain, slipping further away each time. When he finally stopped, his knees gave out. He was in Paris. Locals rushed over, their words foreign and muffled through exhaustion. He couldn't understand a thing. None of them spoke English. Agent Sen didn't rest. He took to the skies with the air division in pursuit. He knew the fugitive was somewhere in the city, and his aerial speed would bridge any gap. Even teleportation couldn't outrun a storm fueled by vengeance. Using wind magic, Sen scanned every alley and rooftop, tracking faint traces of Callum's energy. When he finally caught sight of the boy, he unleashed a fire charge across the skyline, igniting a massive explosion that shook the district. 5 minutes earlier, Callum had been spiraling in panic, confused by how he'd ended up in France. Worse, how he'd made such a reckless miscalculation. He now understood that if the guild struck first, his story would end here. He needed a new base of operations, fast. But first, he had to get out of the country alive. Spotting Agent Sen above, dread sank in. They'd found him. There was no time to think, only to act. He formed 2 portals, one ahead to absorb the blast, and one behind for a clean escape route. The explosion roared. His shield spell barely held, but it worked. Sen dove toward the impact zone, scanning the debris. Only a metallic bearing remained. The fugitive had slipped away again. Rage took over. Sen slammed his fist into the ground, shaking the floor beneath him. Callum woke up deep in a forest, wrecked and bleeding, his mana almost drained. His whole body screamed, like he'd just been hit by a damn truck. Even through the pain, he realized he'd underestimated Sen. That mistake nearly got him killed. He swore it would never happen again. Next time, they'd never even find him. Meanwhile, Agent Sen had unleashed a forbidden spell without clearance. 18 civilians dead. The Guild of Magical Regulation was in crisis mode. Their ops were meant to stay in the shadows. Exposure meant destruction. High Magus Tyson scolded Sen, warning that his recklessness could blow their entire cover. Yet Tyson couldn't ignore what he'd seen. The fugitive was no ordinary mage. The kid showed skills beyond what a spatial mage should even touch. His power levels matched Tyson's own, unthinkable for someone so new. No rookie should be standing toe-to-toe with an archmage. Tyson knew this kind of strength didn't just appear. Someone was feeding the boy knowledge, resources, maybe even ancient tech. If Tyson had to intervene personally, every division would face a full restructure. Sen clenched his fists, tension coiling. He was ready to redeem himself. Elsewhere, Callum was surrounded by fire, his vision spinning in chaos. The flames roared, swallowing the world. He called out, desperate for survivors. A faint, broken voice answered, crying for help through the smoke. He rushed forward. A girl was pinned beneath a fallen slab of stone. Straining, he lifted it and pulled her free. She pointed shakily toward a man controlling the inferno itself. Then, without warning, she lunged at him, screaming accusations, her words cracking like thunder. Her face twisted, skin decaying, eyes hollow. She became a corpse before him. Callum jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Just another nightmare. He was on a plane, forcing his breath steady so no one noticed. News flashed on the cabin screen. 18 dead in a sudden kitchen fire. His stomach dropped. Those deaths were on him. The guilt carved deeper than any wound. He'd carry it forever. The intercom buzzed. Touchdown in Texas. Pain stabbed through his skull. His home bond spell was failing. Its magical link flickered, unraveling fast. Given what he'd put it through, it was a miracle it lasted this long. Cheap materials always burned out under pressure. But he had a plan. He'd rebuild the home bond, stronger and smarter. At a metalworks shop, he asked the clerk if she dealt in high-grade alloys. He needed something special, and lucky for him, she took custom magic orders. He slid his schematics across the counter. The blacksmith stared, stunned by the blueprint's complexity. She said the job was doable if he brought the right materials. Callum opened his bag, showing her what he'd gathered. She examined the metal, awe flickering in her eyes. The alloy was otherworldly. They'd need melting tests, but in a few days it would be ready. It had been ages since he'd crafted anything that actually mattered. Tricks weren't enough to outsmart the guild. He had to evolve, always learn. With enough resources, he could build a small teleportation web like the guild's own network. In theory, he'd travel across the planet in seconds. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of thought. The caller ID flashed. It was Lucy. Lucy instantly knew guild mages had gone after him again. Rumors whispered that he moved between worlds like some untouchable ghost. Easier for the guild to paint him as a villain than admit he slipped past their sacred defenses. Lucy had two theories. Either the guild was just a bunch of clueless clowns who couldn't guard their own realms, or he was so freaking powerful he could wipe them out with one spell. She hadn't decided which version thrilled her more. Callum began spinning a thin thread of vis. Looked harmless at first, just a shimmer in the air. But once he infused it with spatial energy, magic swirled into a pulsing sphere. The thread expanded, humming like a living thing. He grabbed a clip and pierced the orb. In a flash, energy burst out, the clip disintegrating into dust. He'd done it, created space bigger inside than outside. No time travel yet, no dimension hopping. But the potential was massive. If he refined it, he could ditch rented lockers and carry his own pocket dimension. Sunlight spilled into the room. Already noon. Friday. Time to check on the workshop. Inside, the smith looked exhausted but proud. The alloy turned out wild. Heavy, like lead, but far tougher. She'd tested melting points and composition through long nights. Finally, she forged 3 kilos of ultrafine wire, more than he expected. Enough left for extra builds, too. He didn't just get an upgrade. He got 5 full home bonds. Shocked and hyped, he thanked the craftswoman. But the price tag hit hard. Nearly drained his wallet dry. That sting reminded him to call Lucy. They hadn't talked since that awkward chat, and he feared another flop, yet she picked up instantly. Accidentally called him a cool guy, then stumbled over her words. He greeted her, and Lucy joked he was firing her. But no, he had a job for her. He needed help selling his latest creation, a next-gen, fully independent home bond, free from guild control. Lucy instantly sensed the gravity of it. Unregistered magic tech on the black market was pure gold. But owning one meant risking prison, or worse. Sure, it could sell for millions, but who'd dare buy it? Lucy warned it was crazy dangerous, but promised a cut if she found a buyer. Meanwhile, Archmage Hargrave raged in his tower. How could Callum vanish again? Agent Jean reported 0 traces, his vis signature too faint, his masking flawless. 2 failed captures, both humiliating. The man had defiled his precious granddaughter, and vengeance burned in his veins. He ordered John to handle a high-priority mission. Someone in the guild had to be helping Callum. Archmage Duval took interest, and Hargrave put Jean in charge of an internal probe. He was sure a mole lurked among them. Next day, Callum rang Lucy, asking for any updates on buyers. She sighed. Finding someone shady enough was harder than expected. Unexpectedly, the best buyer turned out to be Chester, the alpha he already knew. Callum tensed. Too convenient. Was Chester just doing him a favor? Lucy explained only Duval usually made these devices. An alternate maker raised questions. Chester's influence could bury the issue. Callum didn't want vampire-werewolf drama, but funds were almost gone. Building a bunker to hide from the guild required serious cash. He agreed to meet Chester, but first had to finish enchanting the devices. Lucy scheduled the meeting for tomorrow. Callum knew the quality had to be flawless. Every home bond used gave him slight nausea. Imagining Chester constantly medicating after teleporting made him cringe. Werewolves couldn't control magic like mages. A standard magic ring wouldn't suffice. He crafted 2 connected plates for easier device use. Working through the night, he finally forged a pair of perfect home bonds for Chester. Next day, he contacted the Alpha, who sensed something big. Callum offered a teleportation network, unlinked from the guild. Chester was intrigued, but Callum warned it would cost a lot. Chester was ready to pay handsomely. Callum explained the device was stripped of all guild ties. Simple, subtle, safe. He personally verified security features, ensuring nothing dangerous remained. He asked Chester to allocate 20% to Lucy as her broker's fee. Alpha agreed and requested her to send the cash location details. Deal closed smoothly. Callum was satisfied with the partnership. Meanwhile, agents were unexpectedly summoned. Bad news, clearly. Ray Denfort joked with Felicia Black about who'd get fired first. Entering the office, Agent John thanked them for the prompt response. The conversation was recorded. Ray spoke first. Jian turned to Felicia, noting her tension, assuring she was shielded from scrutiny. First question, how long have they worked together? Ray answered, quite a while. Then asked about ties to organizations outside the guild. Felicia denied everything. Next questions escalated. Had they leaked classified info? Both agents were shocked by the accusations. Ray insisted they weren't foolish enough to anger the guild. Jean shifted to the Callum Wells case. Both agents were present during his escape, looking suspicious. They followed protocol. No one expected teleportation. John asked the core question. Did they consider themselves competent? Magic criminals rarely slip past agents unnoticed. Ray admitted past failures, but framed them as motivation to catch him. John then revealed that Archmage Hargrave relieved them of current duties. The agents were alarmed, angry. No one else could handle it better. Jean clarified, not removed, reassigned. There was reason to believe Callum had a guild informant. They were invited to join the investigation. Morning. Lucy woke to the alarm and gasped. She was late. Rushing to the elevator, the doors closed in her face. No one even tried to hold them. Anger flared again at the mages, treating her like trash despite her magical lineage. She clenched her fists, vowing not to let them underestimate her. The day had only just begun, and chaos was already looming. Lucy reached work and instantly got a sharp alert blasting across her screen. All staff ordered to the first floor. No delays, no excuses. Agent Jean announced guild problems had erupted, tension thick in the air. Interviews with employees were scheduled, urgency slicing through the morning calm. Those with nothing to hide had no reason to worry. Total confidentiality promised. Felicia Black's magic swept through, silencing everyone instantly, a shadow of authority. Jian called IDs. Lucy's number rang out and she stepped into the interrogation room. Resistance was impossible. The agent's compulsion forced truth from her. Felicia asked if she ever transmitted guild-restricted information. Fear gripped her as she answered no. Not a lie. She hadn't transmitted. She sold data discreetly. The agent pressed on. Did she know anyone spreading forbidden info to outsiders? Lucy recounted a dull story from 5 years prior. Next question? Any involvement with Alpha Chester? She explained she handled technical support and fixed malfunctions. That was her job. Felicia asked about serious connections beyond the guild or Chester's pack. Lucy tensed, careful not to reveal too much. Felicia demanded an answer, her tone sharp as a blade. Nervously, nearly stammering, Lucy admitted chatting with a guy at work. Felicia snorted. Personal life was irrelevant to her. Interrogation ended. Lucy was released, shaken but unharmed. John analyzed all answers. No confessions surfaced. They figured progress might be faster if staff knew the interrogation's purpose. But agency policy forbade it, especially for internal investigations. Meanwhile, fairies began whispering rumors. Internal leaks could shatter magical balance. A war between magical factions could become inevitable. While staff were distracted, Denfort scanned for magical traces. Some had personal watchers, but nothing suspicious appeared. Jean's frustration grew. Sometimes there were just no leads. Still, he doubted Lucy was as clean as she seemed. Intuition screamed she was worth watching. Meanwhile, Callum activated the home bond. It performed even better than expected, magic humming perfectly. Side effects vanished. Nausea, stomach pain, all gone. Now only one task remained. Deliver the home bond to the drop point and collect payment. He tried calling Lucy first. No answer. Instantly, alarm bells rang in his mind. Maybe she'd been caught. He sank his main phone to avoid guild tracking. Switching to disposable phones, he contacted Chester securely. Rushing to the stash, he remained alert, ready to vanish at a moment's notice. Time passed. Lucy still didn't respond. Worry gnawed at him. Calling Chester seemed necessary, but Lucy might have changed her number for safety reasons. He headed to the warehouse solo. Opening the locker, he found a bag brimming with gold bars. Enough wealth to never work again. Yet thoughts of Lucy clawed at his mind relentlessly. Suddenly, Lucy's call came through. She apologized for missing him and explained she was checking devices to ensure no tracking. The guild might have slipped a bug on her, watching moves like a shadow in the speakers. She said they grilled her, trying to squeeze details about him, questions like knives. Lucy managed to sell a story and walk free, convincing them she had nothing useful. The interrogation left her eyes colder. Trust in the guild cracked. Callum felt steadied, knowing she hadn't sat idle. She'd tried to help him. She offered support, but dropped bad news that hit like frost. The guild had rounded up the people he rescued in the fairy woods. A letter was intercepted. They were being shipped to a guild office in Miami. Callum decided then he'd ride straight to Miami to pull them out. Lucy warned the move could be a trap. Caution needed like iron. He nodded. Every step had to be sharp and silent. Still, he swore to himself he wouldn't stop until they were free. Miami was a stew of fae, werewolves, and mages, wild, dangerous. He felt the weave of vis and mana pulsing through the streets like veins. That flood let him melt into crowds, one mage among many masks. He found the Regulation Guild office where his 2 captives were held. Watchers and guild agents swarmed the premises like wasps. He needed a safe staging ground to work from. Chaos wouldn't do. Callum tuned in, scanning the crowd despite all the supernatural faces. He noticed ordinary humans, clerks, janitors, secretaries moving blind. Blowing the place up with thermite would be hollow justice. Innocence paid the cost. He vowed not to sink to his enemy's level. Killing innocents was off the table. He needed backup to secure these people. Lucy was the key contact. She asked how extraction plans stood, voice steady under pressure. Callum admitted the op hadn't started. The timing wasn't right. Extracting them would spark a guild manhunt. Safety required a shield. That shield had to be someone wildly powerful, an archmage or equivalent. A fairy king could play politics. Feuding kings loved causing pain to rivals. Callum considered persuading a fairy monarch to shelter the prisoners. Rumors said King Gisseril hunted him worldwide, but came up empty. Lucy set up a meeting with a king. Audacity met diplomacy. King Ferachar bristled at being summoned, surprised someone hid their face to meet him. He perked when he heard Callum's plan to needle the guild and jab Gisseril. Callum framed it as no political play, just consequences the king might enjoy. Ferachar agreed to help, though he expected grander theater from visitors. He promised that if guild pushed, he'd feign ignorance and shelter the rescued. Callum left satisfied. The pact bolstered his growing legend. Fame stacked up, a double-edged sword that might bite later. For now, action was all that mattered. Plans had to move. The escape plan was set, hinging on whether he could hold his end. To free the 2, he had to infiltrate the Regulation Guild office itself. Callum often wondered how the guild powered such an omniscient net. That surveillance must gulp massive mana to feed its grid. He suspected tech, then spotted the real trick hidden in plain sight. Deep in the building, a tiny portal linked to some other pocket world. Too small to step through, but big enough to siphon raw mana. That little hole pumped endless vis into the guild's network like a drain. To stay unseen and free the prisoners, destroying that portal was mission 1. But first he needed transport. Moving 2 people across a city by bike was impossible. Wheels alone wouldn't cut it. A better extraction plan was required. A small truck looked low profile enough to blend, perfect for hauling stealth gear. He loaded the trunk with essentials, ready for the next stage of the raid. After that run-in with Agent Sen, staying hidden had become a priority. But he couldn't just sit while the guild crushed lives underfoot. Action time had arrived, sharp as a blade through the dark. Step 1, prepare a jar of water. Simple and unassuming. Step 2, spin a vis thread, crafting a pocket space larger inside than out. Step 3, dip the thread in water, using it to store the entire liquid. Step 4, fill the jar with metallic scraps, primed for chaos. When the storage ruptured, water would burst out, triggering a violent splash. A simple but brutal nail bomb, homemade and precise. Next, he had to place it near the portal, heart racing. When it triggered, the portal's support structure would collapse, taking the surveillance offline. He inhaled deep, steadying his nerves for the moment. Inside, a tremor shook the building, a prelude to chaos. Nail bombs shot through the portal, precise arcs of deadly distraction. Explosions weren't meant to kill, only to panic and scatter the office. As office staff scrambled in alarm, chaos became his ally. Beneath the captives, a portal opened silently, a lifeline ready. They fell through into the waiting truck, hearts pounding. Recognition sparked. Callum's face brought relief and hope. He explained he'd drive them to safety. All they needed was silence. The rescued murmured confusion. Why were shadows always on their heels? Callum apologized, owning that his battles had dragged them in. Questions flew about his identity and the chaos around them. He brushed them off. None of it mattered. Today was their last sight of him. One grew angry, voice rising. But the girl shushed him, understanding Callum's intent. He nodded, empathy deep, remembering his own lost position once. He'd been them, thrust into a world tearing reality apart. The supernatural crashes in uninvited, toppling all he thought steady. He'd arranged protection for them, safe hands, then they'd choose their path. A few more streets and tension spiked. In the rearview mirror, police lights gleamed, flashing urgent. Commands to stop pierced the air, mundane danger colliding with magic. Callum had been too focused on the guild, forgetting mundane watchers. Police joined the hunt, increasing the risk. Guild agents could be close. Lose the tail or they'd be caught. Every second mattered. The captives asked why not just teleport them away. Callum shook his head. That'd draw attention, too, risky with pursuit ongoing. Longer they stayed exposed, the higher the chance guild eyes would notice. The car halted. An officer demanded a window be opened. Callum greeted, masking tension behind calm. The officer cited a strange smell, prompting inspection. He realized the scent came from the repellent he'd sprayed to deter werewolves. The captive stumbled slightly, drunk with adrenaline and fear. The officer, uninterested in complications, told him to drive them home. Then Callum spotted a guild agent nearby, time to vanish. He slammed the pedal. The truck shot forward like lightning. Agents streaked past at impossible speeds, shadows closing fast. Reinforcements had arrived. The guild wouldn't let this go quietly after the office strike. They were almost at the safe zone, the final stretch of tension slicing through the night air. Now on fairy territory, he could finally open the portal, shadows and magic weaving around him. He told the captives to step through and convey that the ghost had sent them. Mission accomplished. He delivered them. Now they had to vanish on their own. He promised a friend would reach out once everything settled, a silent guardian waiting. They stepped into the portal, gratitude and relief flickering in their eyes. Meanwhile, Ray Denfort inspected the breach, baffled at the weak security setup. He'd warned them about Callum, so why were they so unprepared? Guards insisted patrols were strengthened, with werewolves and vampires stationed, surveillance running non-stop. Felicia noticed her partner's temper flaring beyond normal, tension crackling like lightning. He kept her away from local ferries, aware of her volatile history with them. The agent searched for clues, finding only puddles and scattered metal shards. Suddenly, the Archmage appeared, claiming it was just sea blood, calm amidst chaos. He warned that one suspect was far stronger than anticipated, a force moving on its own. This cycle swept through everything, unstoppable and ruthless, leaving devastation behind. The Archmage commanded Duval's presence, the only one capable of untangling the mess. Duval had been meditating, a rare pause in her relentless rhythm. Her phone rang, slicing the silence. A summons she couldn't ignore. Ray reported another encounter with Callum Wells, a phantom yet deadly precise. Though unseen, he freed 2 captives, his signature crime style unmistakable. Spatial magic traces littered the scene, evidence Duval could analyze expertly. Irritated, she dismissed them as incompetent and demanded the timeline. She quickly mobilized, heading straight to the Guild's Miami HQ, urgency fueling her. Ray explained teleportation structures were damaged. Wells had likely moved something critical. Arriving, Duval immediately began her arcane analysis, mind sharp and focused. Her senses locked onto Wells's spatial magic, feeling its rough precision and hidden finesse. The magic was crude yet exact, chaos wrapped in meticulous control. Remaining traces merged with metal shards, echoing his previous techniques, hauntingly familiar. This criminal was dangerous, enigmatic, leaving experts constantly on edge. Archmage Vizzy entered unannounced, intent clear in his confident stride. He claimed personal business, disregarding protocol, yet commanding attention. Duval, irritated, demanded his true intentions, eyes sparking with authority. Vizzy expressed curiosity about Callum Wells and his entanglement in unfolding chaos. He boasted long-standing vows to eliminate criminals and their collaborators, allies be damned. One of the oldest mages, his oddities rarely surprised Duval anymore. Still, she remained vigilant, skilled in handling unpredictable powerhouses. A black magic orb materialized in her hands, dark energy humming with lethal potential. Vizzy only smirked, claiming one day he too would face such arcane skill. Jean's analysis revealed Wells's subtle technique, evading detection with ghost-like precision. Yet how he bypassed defenses from afar remained a question burning in their minds. Recognizing the threat, John proposed reinforcing HQ security, though full protection seemed impossible. Expectations soared, predicting Wells's next move could tip the balance in their favor. Meanwhile, Callum headed toward Mexico, shadows trailing but unseen. He decided to delay contacting Lucy, patience a shield in the storm. A call now could draw unwanted attention, endangering her safety in the midst of chaos. He hoped for calm, planning to reach her after the dust settled in a few days. For now, his focus narrowed to scouting a new base, mind sharp as steel. Jean discovered the fairies had hidden 2 individuals, erased from memory by magic. Though aware of their existence, no guild member could identify them, a ghosted anomaly. Hargreave realized these people allied with fairies and questioned the Miami King's stance on the matter. He tried to hide his intentions, but the tension around him screamed schemes in motion. Hargreave believed rescuing the hidden ones would lead straight to those tied to Wells. Most of Wells's network were guarded by werewolves, or Scalatough ward magic, leaving only a few unshielded, vulnerable nodes. It was clear someone fed Wells info, and that leak had to end. The agent agreed, suggesting they track the informant who could guide them to Wells. Once the traitor was caught, Wells would surface, and they'd have him cornered. Lucy sat in a bar, thinking drowning her worries wasn't the worst option tonight. Life hadn't brought joy lately. Solitude with a drink felt almost comforting. The barista asked her profession, curiosity sparkling in the dim lights. Lucy said she was an IT specialist at a security company, shadows of work hanging over her. A recent massive data leak had investigators tracking her every move. Worst of all, she hadn't heard from her friend in a week, worried he might be angry. She admitted her choices may have been reckless, putting him in danger for personal gain. The bartender poured another drink, saying some worries deserved a strong sip. Suddenly, her phone rang, slicing through the quiet like a blade. Recognizing the number, Lucy eagerly answered, heart skipping. It was Callum. He apologized, explaining he vanished after rescuing 2 in Miami, worried for her safety. The guild was in turmoil, and he refused to expose her to its wrath. He was in Mexico, requesting a map marked with all supernatural sites. Lucy found the map and promised to send it, fingers trembling slightly. She felt weighed down, thinking he only called for business, not for her. Callum explained he valued her help, grateful for the info on the rescued duo. He vowed that if she ever faced danger, he'd always be there to protect her. After the call, Lucy returned to the bartender, heart slightly lighter. She asked for a drink that could calm the storm inside, realizing she was falling. The next day, Callum attended a business meeting under the morning sun. He planned to buy land for a home, a rare moment of mundane focus. He hoped the seller could connect him with local construction crews. The seller asked why he chose the area, genuine curiosity in his tone. Callum said friends recommended it, masking his true interest. The land near a portal world held residual magic, perfect for a secret base. The price was steep, glittering like a challenge, but he remained calm. He offered a gold ingot, enough to seal the deal without hesitation. The seller agreed, eyes widening at the sudden wealth. Meanwhile, Vampire Antoine seethed, centuries of frustration boiling. His kind hadn't recruited for nearly 60 years, all because the guild failed to catch a rogue mage. Jean tried to soothe him, saying all that could be done had been done, and he could venture into the Nightlands himself to recruit new vampires. Antoine wouldn't stop there, labeling everyone in the guild useless. He spun on his heel, storming off in frustration. Jean proposed they act independently to track the killer themselves. Vampires knew someone crucial who could guide them, Clara Langley. Antoine agreed, ordering her capture along with the rest of the Langleys, to settle the score with the rogue mage once and for all. Werewolves learned the vampires were heading to Vinut. Lavin and his pack had been hounding them, and Alpha Chester knew it was only a matter of time. He wondered why they hadn't returned immediately. Chester assumed it was an official mission, the gears of supernatural politics grinding onward. He decided to call Jasper, a perfect moment to test the new homebond tech. The sheriff contacted Alpha, who confirmed vampires were on their way. They were furious. Their friend didn't show, so vengeance was brewing. Alpha arranged for them to stay at his place. After all, Lavin's vampires hunted the sheriff's family. Arthur worried about the city, not wanting it left defenseless. Chester assured him he'd handle the vampires personally. He suspected someone slipped info, triggering the vampire mess because of Clara. Had she not been abducted, Ghost might never have intervened. The heroes used Homebond to teleport Arthur's family safely to his house. Chester warned the sheriff not to expect a long rest. Vampires would be swiftly dealt with. The teleport plate was small, so moving everyone at once wasn't possible. Still, it worked, a feat worth acknowledging for its cleverness. Once Venut was secured, Alpha would message Jasper, and he'd teleport them back. Late at night, Alpha checked if the vampires had appeared. Not yet, but a werewolf kept watch on every direction. If vampires appeared, they'd know instantly. Readiness was crucial. Meanwhile, vampires took positions, poised to strike. Speed was their edge over werewolves. The fight would be decided in seconds. Werewolves acted on instinct. 10 figures were spotted nearby. All werewolves were ordered into position, bristling with tension. Vampires expected the Langleys here, not werewolves. They planned to exploit this advantage in the ambush. Chester hadn't needed his battle form in ages, but the magic flowing through the pack surged, as potent as the day he was born. He shifted into his werewolf form, vowing no one would threaten his people. Vampires and werewolves clashed in a brutal, lightning-fast battle. Vampires soon realized they weren't facing the Langleys. Their opponent had anticipated the attack with chilling precision. Victory was nearly impossible for the vampires in this encounter. But alas grinned. Satisfied, Chester finally showed himself. He aimed to deliver Chester's head to his master. With inhuman speed, he lunged, striking from behind. Alas's strike was flawless, wounding Chester in a flash. The vampire admitted the Alpha was fast, yet Alas was faster. One hesitation, and Chester's heart would have been lost. Fear gripped him briefly, but he snapped back instantly. Grabbing Alas by the shoulders, Chester tore him apart with feral strength. The vampire fell lifeless. The rest froze, witnessing true power. The Alpha roared, commanding the werewolves to annihilate all enemies. Vampires, realizing defeat, fled into the shadows. By dawn, it was clear. The werewolves had triumphed. Chester warned Lavin that to kill him, he'd need someone stronger than a lone lackey. Then he checked on the others' status. The werewolves suffered only scratches. Their ambush had been flawless. The teleport device proved priceless. Silent insertion secured victory. Alpha praised his warriors. They had fought valiantly. From that day, Vinet was vampire-free. The next day, the hero focused on training. Work had been so relentless lately. There was little time for exercise. Magic was potent, but physical form mattered. Spells don't always save you. Though settling near a portal world, limited mana access wasn't a concern for him.